Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving from Flagstaff to a little town called Trona in the Mojave. Long stretch of desert, barely any cell service, no big towns for hours. I left late on purpose, trying to beat the heat. Around 9:30 p.m., I hit that dead part of the route past Amboy, where it's nothing but scrub and sand on both sides, and you feel like the sky's too big for the world underneath it. I had my dog with me, Lula, an old cattle dog mix who mostly just sleeps in the passenger seat. She hates being left behind, and I was staying at my friend Mallory's place for a week, so I brought her along. The plan was to drive through the night, get in before sunrise, crash for a few hours. Right after I passed the turnoff for Route 66, I noticed a red light off to the left. It looked like a radio tower at first, same kind of steady glow. But there's nothing out there. No towers, no buildings, no elevation changes either, just flat desert and hills way out in the distance. I thought maybe it was some kind of aircraft warning light, but it wasn't blinking. It just stayed steady like a red eye floating over the scrub brush. It was far away, maybe a mile out, but it moved when I moved. I'd slow down a little, it would slow. Speed up, same thing. Never got closer, never fell behind. It just matched me perfectly, but always to the left and just over the horizon line. I kept glancing at it every few minutes. Lula didn't seem to notice at first, just slept with her chin on the window ledge, twitching her ears. Around 10:30, she lifted her head and looked across me toward the driver's side window. Then she sat up completely and started this low growl she only does when something's really wrong. Not a threat growl, more like a warning. She didn't bark, just stared and growled under her breath, like she couldn't decide whether to be afraid or angry. I pulled over, thinking maybe there was something outside, like a coyote or something stuck under the car. I left the engine running and got out with a flashlight. Total silence. The desert was dead still. I looked toward the red light and it hadn't moved, not even a flicker. Just hung there, same spot, same height. I aimed the flashlight in its direction, but obviously the beam didn't reach even halfway. When I got back in, Lula had shifted into the footwell on the passenger side, curled tight. She never does that. She always wants to see out the window. I asked her what was wrong out loud, mostly just to hear my own voice, and she didn't move. I pulled back onto the road, slower this time. The red light moved with me again, same distance, same speed. This went on for about another half hour. The road curved west a bit, and I lost sight of the light behind a ridge. I figured that was it. Some weird illusion, maybe headlights reflecting off dust in the air. I tried to push it out of my head. Then the road straightened out, and the light was back, exactly where it had been before. Just to the left, same height, like it had waited for me to reappear. By now it was nearly midnight and I was getting tired. I'd had half a thermos of coffee, but it wasn't helping. My eyes kept drifting to the left, over and over. I even swerved a little once because I looked too long. Lula was sitting up now, panting lightly, not from heat. She does that when she's anxious, like during fireworks or thunder. I rolled the windows down, no sound. Just the tires and the occasional whisper of sand across the road. I hit a stretch where the road ran perfectly straight for about 10 miles. That's when things started getting weird. Not just the light, my car started acting up. The radio cut out. Not static, just silence. I don't usually listen to anything out there, but I had some old CDs playing, and the music just dropped out mid-track. Display still showed it spinning, volume up, no sound. Then the dashboard lights dimmed. Not a lot, just a flicker, like a power dip. The speedometer needle twitched and settled again. I was going 65, maybe 70, nothing crazy. Engine sounded fine, no warning lights, just that flicker and the silence. The red light stayed with me. At some point, maybe 12:30 I think, I passed a gas station that looked closed. No lights, no sign lit up. I thought about pulling over, just stopping under one of the canopy roofs until I could figure out what was going on, but something told me not to. I can't explain it. I just kept driving. A couple minutes later, I checked my rear view and noticed something strange. There were no headlights behind me. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. That's not super rare for that stretch, but usually there's at least a truck now and then, not a single vehicle, just darkness behind and that one red light to the left. I tried my phone again. No signal, just the emergency call option. Lula was whining now, quiet and shaky, and kept shifting in her seat like she couldn't get comfortable. I rolled down my window and leaned out a little, trying to get a better look at the light. It still wasn't blinking. No movement, no shape, just a steady red point. But it didn't feel far anymore. It was still off to the side, sure, but something about it felt closer. Like if I stopped the car and walked out into the desert, it'd be waiting right there, behind the first rise. That thought scared me in a way I can't really explain. The road eventually curved sharply right, toward a low canyon area. When I came out the other side, the red light was gone, just disappeared. Lula perked up immediately and crawled back onto the seat, like a switch had been flipped. She stuck her head out the window, sniffed the air, then laid back down like it was all over. And just like that, the radio kicked back in. Same track. CD spinning like nothing had happened. I drove the rest of the way without stopping. Rolled into Trona a little after 3 a.m., pulled into Mallory's driveway, and sat in the car for a while with the engine running. My hands were still tight on the wheel, and Lula didn't move until I shut off the ignition. Then she jumped out and ran straight to the front door, like she knew exactly where we were. I told Mallory I'd gotten delayed by a construction detour. I didn't say anything about the light, or the radio, or the way my speedometer would jerk randomly between 55 and 80 without the car actually changing speed. I didn't say anything about Lula whining and hiding from the windows either. I don't think I could have explained it right. I drove that same stretch on the way back a week later, in broad daylight. Nothing strange happened, no red light, just dust and heat and an empty road, and no cell signal for nearly 90 miles. It started the first week of June, just after calving season had wrapped up. I've lived on the same property outside Belforche my whole life. My dad ran cattle here before me, and I took over when he passed in '09. About 70 head, mostly Angus and some mixed Charolais. Quiet land, 20-some acres of pasture rolling up into a low ridge on the north end. Beyond that, it's just open fields and grazing leases. Closest neighbor is 3 miles off. That week, the nights were clear and warm, barely any wind. I was sleeping with the windows open, letting the house cool naturally. Around midnight on a Tuesday, I woke up to the cattle making noise. Not panicked, exactly, just stirred up. A low, unsettled kind of bellowing. I got up, thinking maybe a coyote had come close to the fence line, but when I stepped out onto the porch, everything was still. No barking from my dog Margot, who usually makes a racket at anything that doesn't belong. I grabbed the spotlight and walked down to the fence line. The cows were all huddled in the far northwest corner of the pasture, packed tight like they do when there's a storm coming, even though the sky was clear. All of them were facing the same direction, north toward the top of the ridge. I scanned the tree line, thinking maybe something was moving up there, but didn't see anything. I chalked it up to a scent they'd picked up, or maybe some animal passed by and they just reacted late. Next night, same thing. Around 12:15, I heard them again, lowing, shifting their weight, milling around. I threw on jeans, grabbed the light, and this time I brought Margot. She's a blue heeler lab mix. Real nosy, smart as hell, usually the first one to know when something's off. We got down to the field, and sure enough, the cattle were back in that corner. Same exact spot, same tight formation, all facing north again. But this time, there was a faint light up past the ridge. Not bright, not moving. Just a soft pulsing, white with a bluish tinge. Almost like a slow strobe, blinking once every second or two. I couldn't tell what it was coming from. Too far to see clearly and too consistent to be a vehicle. I stood there watching for 10, maybe 15 minutes. Never changed position, never got brighter. Eventually, it just faded out. Cattle stayed put though. Third night, it happened again. That's when I started getting nervous. Same time, same corner, same blinking light up beyond the ridge. This time I watched from my second-story window with the binoculars. I didn't want to go back down there again. I'd had a weird feeling in my chest all afternoon, like my ribs were too tight. Margot wouldn't even leave the porch when I opened the door. She just sat by the screen and stared into the dark, ears flat. Through the binoculars, the light looked closer. It wasn't on a pole, wasn't coming from a building or vehicle. There was no glow spilling onto the trees around it, no sound, just that steady blinking. When I looked away and back, it would seem like it had moved slightly, though that might have just been my eyes adjusting. By the fifth night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room with the lights off, waiting. At 12:06 on the dot, the first cow called out. Margot lifted her head from where she was laying and growled, low and quiet. I stepped out to the porch and didn't even need the spotlight. The moon was bright enough to see the field clearly. Same corner, same direction, same light. I went back inside and grabbed my old trail camera. I hadn't used it since deer season, but the batteries were good. I walked down past the barn and set it up facing the ridge. It had motion activation and a timed shutter, so I set it to take a shot every minute for the next 6 hours. I figured if I could get even a blurry frame, maybe I'd have something to go off. The next morning, I checked it. Every shot was blank. Not black, just blank. You could see the field, the trees, the cows, but no light. Not even when I remembered seeing it blink for a solid hour, like it hadn't been there at all. That afternoon, I walked up the ridge. There's a narrow path that deer use, and I followed it to the top. From there, you can see my whole property. The cattle were spread out again like normal, grazing, laying down, not a care in the world. But on the other side of the ridge, where the light had been coming from, there was nothing. No tire tracks, no footprints, no brush disturbed, just tall grass and wild rose bushes. But I did find one thing. About 20 feet from the ridge line, there was a ring of flattened grass, not burned or cut, just pressed down in a near-perfect circle, maybe 10 feet wide. No debris, no scorch marks, just matted vegetation, like something heavy had sat there for a while and lifted straight up. I didn't touch it. I stood there looking at it for a few minutes, then walked back down. Margot met me at the barn, but didn't follow me into the house. That night, I didn't see the light, but the cows still gathered in the corner, still faced the ridge. The following night, it came back, brighter this time. I watched it from the back of the truck bed, parked by the barn. I had my rifle with me, not that I knew what good it would do. The light stayed for about 45 minutes, blinking steadily. At one point it paused, held steady for maybe 10 seconds, then blinked again, but slower, like a different rhythm. Cattle didn't move an inch. Margot sat beside me the whole time, silent. I've never seen her that still. By the 7th night, I was exhausted. I'd slept maybe 4 hours total over the last few days. I was half convinced it was something explainable, military training out past the hill, or maybe someone screwing with me. But no drone or ATV could have stayed out there with no noise, no movement, no power source. That night, it changed. The light didn't blink, it glowed, solid and low, like a lantern behind a sheet. It rose slowly above the ridgeline and hung there, just above the trees. Not high, maybe 30 feet. No shape I could make out, just a bright, dull white glow, no flicker. I could see the tree branches lit up underneath it, but not clearly. The light didn't cast like a spotlight, it was contained somehow. Then it began to move. Not fast, not erratic, just a slow drift, parallel to the ridge, maybe 50 yards from one end to the other. I stayed completely still, watching through the scope on my rifle. No noise, no wind, just that quiet drift, like a balloon tethered on a long line. It paused halfway, hovered again, and then dropped. Straight down like someone cutting a rope. No flash, no crash, just gone. The glow blinked out like a light bulb turning off. The forest was pitch black again. The cattle didn't react. Margot whined once, then laid down in the bed of the truck. I didn't sleep that night either. The air felt different, heavy like the start of a pressure front, even though the forecast was clear. It hasn't come back since. The cattle still wander, spread out now. No more corner gatherings. Margot's normal again. I checked the spot on the ridge twice last week. Grass is standing tall again. Whatever flattened it is gone. I didn't tell anyone around here. Folks don't really talk about things like that unless someone else brings it up first. But I did talk to a guy at the feed store a few towns over. He mentioned his horses acting strange around the same time. Said they wouldn't graze past dusk for nearly 2 weeks. I didn't ask him more. Didn't want to hear something that make me go looking again. It started maybe 3 weeks after I moved into the house. It's a little place on the outskirts of Olympia, tucked back off a gravel road with a decent yard and a patch of woods at the back fence. I bought it after my divorce, wanted something quiet, nothing fancy. Just me and my dog, Clover. She's a mutt, part collie, part shepherd, probably something else thrown in, real gentle but smart. She's 11 now, slowing down some. Doesn't bark much, unless it's for a reason. The first night I noticed something, I was brushing my teeth before bed and Clover started growling out in the living room. It wasn't loud, more like a low rumble. I walked out with my toothbrush still in my mouth, thinking maybe she heard a coyote or something in the trees. But she wasn't facing the back fence. She was planted right by the sliding door that leads to the deck, staring straight up, not at a squirrel in the tree or a bug on the glass, straight up into the sky. And her whole body was shaking. Not full-on shaking like she was sick, but a tremble. Her front legs were stiff, and she kept making this weird whining sound between growls. I flipped on the porch light and looked out. Clear night. Cold, maybe in the 40s. No wind. I didn't see anything. Then the lights inside dimmed. Only for a second, not like a flicker, but like someone turned a dimmer switch down and back up real quick. The kitchen light, the living room lamp, even the glow from the microwave display, all of it dipped. No outage, no click from the fridge, no reset on the digital clock. Just a second of low light, then normal. Clover backed away from the door when that happened. She stayed low to the ground and wouldn't come when I called her. I had to crouch down and put my hand out like I was coaxing a puppy. Even then, she wouldn't take her eyes off that spot in the sky. I didn't sleep much that night. I left the porch light on and let her sleep on the bed. Around 2 a.m., she started growling again. Same direction. The next few nights were quiet, nothing weird. She'd go out, sniff around, come back in. I figured maybe she'd seen an owl or something I missed. Could have been anything. Then it happened again the following Thursday. I'd just gotten back from work and was eating dinner in front of the TV when she stood up from her spot and went to the sliding door. No barking, just that low growl and stiff posture. Again, she stared at the exact same patch of sky. I even tried opening the door and stepping out to look. Nothing there. Not a star, not a cloud. The same cold, empty dark. Then the lights inside dimmed. Again, just for a second. It happened like that for the next week. Not every night, but maybe 4 times total. Always around the same time, somewhere between 9:30 and 10. Clover would go still, tremble, growl, and stare at the same spot. And the lights would dip. I started filming it on my phone. I've got 3 different clips. Each time she reacts the same way. You can see her body language shift before the lights dim. The camera doesn't catch anything unusual in the sky. No sound either. Just Clover growling at nothing and the lights fading for a moment. I thought maybe it was a wiring issue, but I had an electrician out and he checked everything. Said the panel was solid, the grid feed was stable, and there were no signs of dips in voltage. He even checked the power company's reporting site for outages or maintenance. Nothing. I stopped turning on the porch light after that. I figured maybe whatever it was didn't like being lit up. One night I decided to sit out there with her. I brought a blanket and my thermos and sat in the patio chair while she sniffed around the yard. She was normal at first. Then right around 9:45, she froze. Tail low, ears up. She looked straight up at that same patch. I didn't hear or see anything, but I felt something. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure. Not in my ears, in my chest. Like standing too close to a big speaker that isn't playing music but still has a hum to it. It only lasted a few seconds. Then Clover started whining. She ran back toward the door and scratched to get in, and just as I reached the handle, the lights inside dimmed. After that, I stopped going out there at night. The weirdest part came about a week later. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth again, same as before, and Clover was in the hall behind me. She started whining low in her throat, real quiet. I leaned out and saw her staring down the hallway toward the back door. Her fur was puffed up. That's when the lights dimmed again. But this time, it wasn't just a flicker. The brightness dropped low and stayed there for maybe 5 full seconds, long enough for me to feel it in my skin, if that makes sense. Everything looked sickly, kind of washed out. I looked down and realized the overhead light wasn't the only thing dimmed, my phone screen too. It was charging on the bathroom counter, and even that glow was dimmer than it should have been, like the whole room had gone dark around the edges. Then everything snapped back. I walked the house with a flashlight after that, checked all the windows, peeked out into the yard. Still nothing, but I started noticing something else. Clover would not go near the back door anymore. During the day, sure, she'd go out if I was with her, but at night, she'd whimper if I even tried to get her to the deck. She's not a skittish dog. I've seen her chase off raccoons twice her size, but this was different. One night, I got fed up and tried to record the whole backyard with my old DSLR. I mounted it on a tripod inside, facing through the glass. Left it recording from 9 to 11. When I reviewed the footage, most of it was just normal. Trees swaying, faint light from the neighbor's shed way off through the trees. But there's one part around 9:53 where the camera glitches. The image warps for maybe a second, like the lines stretch, almost like heat shimmer. No sound. No lights in the sky, just this brief moment where everything distorts. I checked the camera after. It was fine, battery full, no other corrupted clips. That weekend, I stayed at my sister's place in Shelton. Slept fine, no dimming lights, no weird behavior from Clover. But the minute we got home Sunday night, she tensed up walking through the living room, stared toward the sliding glass door, and let out this low groan I've never heard from her before. It hasn't stopped completely. Maybe once a week now, the lights dip. Clover growls, stares at the sky, and refuses to go outside. Always the same patch. Right above the back fence, about 30 degrees up. Nothing visible there. I even looked up the star maps to see if there's a satellite or something regular that passes through at that time. Closest thing is a geostationary sat miles off from that spot. No air traffic either. Just open sky. I haven't told anyone but my sister. She came out once and saw Clover react. Got real quiet after that. Said she didn't like how the air felt. I've been keeping the blinds closed now. Every night. Doesn't seem to matter much to Clover. She still growls when the time comes. Still stares through the wall like something's waiting just above the trees. I'd been driving home from Missoula after visiting my sister. It was a Sunday, early October. I remember that because the Broncos were playing and I was streaming the game through the radio. I had about a 3-hour drive back to Dillon, mostly empty highways through foothills and pasture land. Nothing out there but fences and the occasional gas station. I left her place around 5:30 p.m. It was just starting to get dark when I hit Highway 278, which winds through a stretch of country that looks about the same for miles, just 2-lane blacktop, barbed wire, and scattered cattle. The last thing I clearly remember was passing a green sign for Jackson Hot Springs. I wasn't tired. I'd had a full thermos of coffee. I was singing along to the radio, messing with the heater because it had dropped cold fast once the sun dipped. Then, I don't know. The next thing I remember, I was pulled over on the gravel shoulder of the road, my truck in park, engine still running, headlights on. My dog Tater was whining in the passenger seat and pawing at the window like he wanted out. It was full dark by then. Could have been 9, could have been midnight. I had no idea. My phone was dead. Just dead. It had been plugged in, so I didn't understand that. The dash clock said 11:42. I sat there trying to piece together what had happened. I didn't feel groggy or disoriented, just blank. Like nothing had happened at all between when I passed Jackson and when I woke up on the side of the road. No aches, no fog, no headache. I wasn't slumped over the wheel or anything. Just sitting there like I'd meant to stop. I opened the door and stepped out, stretched my legs, looked around. It was cold, real quiet, not even wind. No lights on the horizon, no passing cars, just empty prairie and a faint pine ridge to the west. Tater jumped out and started sniffing around, tail tucked halfway down. He's usually calm, but that night he was pacing. He wouldn't go more than a few feet from the truck. I got back in and started checking the dash cam. I keep a basic front-facing camera mounted just under the rear view. It records automatically when the engine's on, saves everything to an SD card. I figured maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and pulled over without remembering, though that didn't feel right. I scrolled back through the footage. It showed me driving normally, talking to Tater, sipping coffee. The sun was setting. I passed that green sign, just like I remembered. Then the footage cut. One moment I was driving, hands on the wheel, road lit up ahead, and the next, the video jumped forward. When it came back on, it was full night. My truck was parked in the exact spot I'd just woken up in. Same angle, same headlights, nothing in between. 2 hours and 18 minutes were missing. The camera had stayed powered the whole time. It didn't shut down or lose battery. There were no glitches before or after, just that gap. I sat there for a long time, trying to talk myself out of being freaked out. I kept replaying it. The timestamp jumped from 9:22 to 11:40. It wasn't a smooth transition either. It just blinked. No fade, no static, nothing. I started the truck moving again and headed home. Tater was shaking. I kept glancing in the rear view like something might be behind me, even though there was nothing out there, just the empty highway stretching behind. When I finally pulled into my driveway around 1 a.m., I went straight inside, left my bag in the truck. I brought Tater in and locked every door. I didn't sleep, just sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, watching him pace in circles. He wouldn't settle. He kept looking toward the windows like he heard something I couldn't. The next morning, I charged my phone. It turned on normally, but the battery showed 96%. I hadn't plugged it in since the night before. My charging cable was still in the truck, still connected, but the phone had clearly never drained. It just turned off, like something disabled it. That part stuck with me more than anything else, I think. Later that day, I walked back out to the truck. I tried looking for anything off, scratches, dings, a flat tire, nothing. Everything was fine. But when I opened the back seat to grab my bag, I noticed one of the floor mats was damp, just one. Not soaked, but definitely wet, no smell, no visible source, just that one square of carpet. The next few nights, Tater wouldn't sleep in his bed. He slept in the hallway facing the front door, ears twitching at nothing. And I kept having these moments where I'd catch myself staring out the windows toward the trees at the edge of my property, expecting something. I don't know what. A few days later, I pulled the dash cam footage onto my laptop, hoping maybe the bigger screen would show something I'd missed. I watched it again, over and over. Still the same. I'm driving, then suddenly I'm not. But on one playback, I paused it right before the cut. About a second and a half before the timestamp jumps, I saw something. Out in the top left of the screen, barely visible, a set of lights flickered above the tree line. Just for a moment, 3 little dots in a triangle. Then the footage cut. I showed it to a friend of mine who used to work in wildfire surveillance. She looked at it and said it didn't look like a plane, definitely not a tower or a flare. Said she didn't know what it was. That was all. I didn't tell many people about it, just her and one guy from work I trust. I didn't want people thinking I was making stuff up or losing it. But the thing is, I've taken that route a dozen times since. Daylight, dusk, doesn't matter. I can't pass that stretch of road anymore without feeling off, like something's pressing in behind me. And the weirdest part, I've checked that camera every trip since, just to be sure. But the dash cam never recorded that stretch again. Not once. It works fine everywhere else. But between mile markers 58 and 62, it always stops recording, every single time. I was camping out near Lassen National Forest late September. Not peak season, so it was mostly empty. I'd hiked in solo with my dog, Rook. Half blue heeler, half mutt, smart as hell, and not the type to spook easy. I picked a spot maybe a mile off the trail, near a little stream, flat enough to pitch the tent and far enough from the water to avoid condensation soaking everything. Just me, Rook, a fire, and a couple good books. That was the plan. First night was normal, crisp air, quiet except for the wind through the trees. I stayed up late reading, then turned in around 11. Rook crashed immediately, curled at my feet in the tent. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I woke up with this weird pressure in my ears, like being in a plane that's suddenly lost altitude. Not painful, just off. I figured it was the altitude. I wasn't used to being that high up, But then I noticed this hum, real low, like a deep engine idling in the distance. Not loud, but it had a weird way of pressing in, like it was inside the tent instead of outside. I unzipped the flap and stepped out. Sky was clear, stars everywhere, no wind, no sign of anything. The hum stopped maybe 10 seconds after I got out there. Rook didn't react at all. He stayed inside, head on his paws. I stood there for a while, looking around like an idiot, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. Eventually, I went back to bed and chalked it up to tinnitus, or a distant plane. Second night, it happened again. Almost exactly 3 a.m. I checked my watch when I sat up. This time, Rook was up too. Not barking, not whining, just sitting up alert with his ears perked. The hum was back, maybe a little louder. Same low vibration, same weird pressure in my head. I looked over at Rook and he was just staring at the tent wall like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I stepped out again. Same thing. Clear sky, total stillness. The sound cut off about 10 seconds after I got out there. Rook followed me out this time and stood next to me, nose up like he was sniffing something, but there was no scent on the wind. Just cold night air and pine. I walked a slow circle around the camp with my flashlight, scanned the trees. No movement, no animals, no wind. When I got back in the tent, Rook didn't settle right away. He paced a little, then finally laid back down near the entrance. I couldn't fall back asleep for a while. It wasn't like I thought anything was out there, not really, but something was off and my body knew it even if my brain didn't. Third night was colder. I had to zip the sleeping bag all the way up and sleep with a beanie on. Around 2:50 I woke up on my own. No sound yet. No hum. Just this weird tight feeling in my chest, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. Rook was already sitting up staring at the tent door again. I stayed still, listening. The hum came on at exactly 3:01. Not louder than before, but sharper, harder to ignore. It had this mechanical rhythm to it now, like something rotating or pulsing. And it was definitely moving. Not fast, but steady, like it was passing overhead. I swear I could feel it in the ground under me, just the faintest vibration through the dirt. Still no other sounds, no wind, no insects, just that. I stepped out slower this time. Rook didn't move, he just stayed inside, tail down, watching me. The moment I unzipped the tent, the hum stopped again. This time the sky looked strange. Not cloudy, not foggy, just less visible. The stars were still out, but they seemed muted, like looking at them through a layer of haze I couldn't see otherwise. I walked a few yards from the tent and turned off my flashlight to let my eyes adjust. That's when I noticed the clearing wasn't as dark as it should have been. There was this pale sort of glow. Not bright, more like ambient light spilling in from a street lamp that wasn't there. No source, no shadows, just an even dimness all around. Enough to see my breath fogging in the air. I stood there for maybe a minute, not moving, just watching the sky. Then I heard this soft popping sound. Not loud, but it came from directly above, like someone cracking their knuckles right over my head. I looked up fast. Nothing. Just the same star-dulled sky. I backed up toward the tent and Rook finally stepped out with me. His hackles were up, not growling, not barking, just on alert. He turned his head side to side real slow, like he was tracking something that wasn't making a sound. Then he let out this low whine, barely audible, and walked back into the tent on his own. That freaked me out more than anything else. Fourth night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up by the fire until past 2, then sat inside the tent with a flashlight in one hand and my boots still on. Rook wouldn't settle. He paced in circles, scratched at the tent once, then laid down next to me breathing fast, like he'd just run. At exactly 3, the hum kicked in again, louder than before. It built slower this time, like it was rising out of the ground. My ears popped. Rook whimpered and stood up, pushing against me with his body. The tent fabric vibrated slightly, like it was catching wind, but there was no breeze outside. Then I saw the shadows. Not moving shadows, not even solid ones, but the way the light from my flashlight fell on the tent started shifting, like something large was passing between the moon and me, except I couldn't see anything overhead. The shapes were too slow to be animals and too smooth to be tree branches swaying, and there was no sound of movement, just the hum, constant and low. I grabbed my keys and knife and got Rook on the leash. We waited. I didn't unzip the tent, I just sat there, frozen, staring at the distorted light on the nylon walls. Eventually, about 10 minutes later, it all stopped. Like someone flipped a switch. 1 second the noise was there, the next it wasn't. Rook immediately laid down and curled into a ball like nothing happened. I didn't move for another half hour. Then I packed up the essentials and we hiked out with our headlamp on. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I needed to be around other people. When I got to the parking lot at the trailhead, the sun was just coming up. Rook slept in the back seat the whole drive home. I didn't turn on music. I didn't call anyone. Just drove in total silence, checking the sky in my rear view every few minutes like a maniac. That was 9 months ago. I haven't camped alone since. Rook still gets twitchy around 3 a.m. Doesn't matter if we're home or at a friend's place. He'll get up, walk to the door, and sit there listening. I've started waking up at the same time, even if I go to bed late. I never hear anything now. No hum. No pressure. But I still check the sky every time. I was hiking in the Allegheny National Forest last fall, early October. The leaves had just started turning, so I figured I'd do a solo overnight. Just me, my pack, and my dog Denny. He's a mutt, some kind of shepherd-hound mix. Skittish around people, but good in the woods. Usually sticks close and doesn't bark unless there's a reason. I parked at a trailhead near Minister Creek, not far off Route 6666. Took the south loop and broke off toward one of the unmarked game trails about 5 miles in. I'd gone that way before and knew a decent spot near a low ridge, flat ground, small stream nearby, enough cover to feel tucked in without being claustrophobic. No cell reception past the first mile, but I didn't mind. I was just looking to get away for a night. Everything was normal at first. I made camp around 4, boiled some water for coffee, and sat on a log while Denny trotted around sniffing. The air was cool, maybe mid-50s, cloudy but dry. A little wind in the trees, no other hikers nearby, just the sound of squirrels and the occasional woodpecker tapping away. It wasn't until the next morning that I found it. I'd woken up a little before sunrise because Denny was pacing around the tent. He doesn't usually do that unless he needs out, so I unzipped the flap and let him go. He didn't run off, just stood a few feet away, ears up, staring into the trees. I figured maybe he saw a deer or heard something. I stepped out to take a leak and stretch, and that's when I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no bugs, nothing. Just still air and the sound of Denny shifting his weight back and forth on his paws. I didn't think much of it at the time. Got the fire going again, made some oatmeal, packed up camp. Around 8 a.m., I decided to follow a different game trail than the one I'd come in on, just to mix it up. It cut north and looped back toward the main trail eventually. Denny stayed close, not darting ahead like he normally would. Every time I stopped, he stopped. He kept sniffing the air, ears twitching. I figured maybe a bear had been through recently, or a coyote. The forest always has something in it. I'd gone maybe half a mile off trail when I spotted something through the trees up ahead. Just a shape, something dark and low against the bright yellow leaves. At first I thought it was a downed tree or a rock outcrop. But when I got closer, I realized it was a clearing, small, maybe 20 feet across, dead center in the middle of the woods. It wasn't natural. The shape was too perfect. It was a circle. A completely clean, dry, dark circle of bare earth. No leaves, no grass, no pine needles, not even twigs, just soil, blackened like it had been burned. But there was no smell of fire, no ash, and none of the surrounding trees were scorched or even singed. The trunks closest to the edge looked totally untouched. The leaves overhead were still golden, swaying gently. Nothing looked disturbed. I stepped closer, not really sure what I was looking at. The edge of the circle was sharp, like someone had come through with a giant cookie cutter and removed the forest floor down to the dirt. The soil wasn't dug up or raked. It looked cooked. That's the only way I can describe it. Dry, cracked in some places, almost like what you see after a lightning strike hits open ground. But there were no burn marks on the trees, no impact points. And it hadn't rained recently. Denny wouldn't go near it. He stayed about 10 feet back, tail low, eyes locked on the center of the clearing. I called him a few times, tried coaxing him forward, but he just whined softly and sat down. That got my nerves up. I walked the edge of the circle, just slow steps all the way around. No tracks, no prints, no tire marks, nothing. The leaves all around it looked untouched, like the wind hadn't even blown through. I took a stick and scraped at the dirt, expecting it to turn up moist underneath, but it was dry all the way down, maybe 4 or 5 inches deep. I thought maybe it was some kind of old fire pit or campsite, but there weren't any rocks. No trash, no signs of people, and again, that shape, it was too exact. I pulled out my phone, mostly just to check the compass app. It wouldn't load. Battery was fine, full charge from the night before, but none of the apps would open. Compass just froze with the needle spinning. Camera opened, but every picture I tried to take came out black. Not blurry. Black, like I'd left the lens cap on, except it's a phone. That's when I started to feel weird. Not sick, exactly, but wrong. My skin felt tight. My ears were popping a little, like altitude change, even though I hadn't gained much elevation. The pressure in the air felt off, like a storm was about to roll in, but the sky was still cloudy and flat. No thunder, no movement. Just that stillness again, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I crouched down and placed my palm on the dirt in the center of the clearing. It wasn't warm, not cold either, just dead. Like the heat and life had been pulled out of it. I sat back on my heels and suddenly got this wave of nausea. Not from the smell or anything, just this wave like motion sickness. Denny stood up and gave a single bark behind me, sharp and loud. I turned around and looked past him into the trees. Nothing there. No movement. No sound. But he was staring hard, growling low again. Not at an animal. He has a different growl for that. This one was, I don't know. Protective, maybe. Scared. I stood up and backed away from the clearing. Didn't run, but didn't waste time either. We hiked out fast, retraced the trail to the main loop, and kept moving until we hit the parking lot around noon. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't even check my phone again until I was back on the highway, halfway to Warren. Then everything started working like normal. Photos still showed black. Compass worked. GPS kicked back in. I went back a week later with a buddy of mine who works for the Forest Service. I didn't tell him what I thought it was, just said I'd seen a weird burn patch and wanted a second opinion. We hiked to the same spot, or tried to. I had my GPS coordinates from the drive home, marked where I'd stepped off the trail, but it wasn't there. We found the ridge, the stream, even the log I'd sat on for breakfast. But where that circle had been, there was just regular forest floor. Leaves, twigs, damp earth. No scorched patch, no bare dirt, no trace of anything ever being there. Denny stayed close to me the whole time, tail tucked. He wouldn't eat when we stopped for lunch, just stared at the trees again like he was waiting for something. It happened 2 winters ago when I was still living outside Manchester, Vermont. I rented this little place near Bromley. Not up in the mountains, but far enough out that my nearest neighbor was maybe half a mile down a dirt road. I worked remotely, so I kept to myself most days. Only time I really got out was when I jogged the old service trails behind the house. There's a whole network of them, gravel and packed dirt mostly, winding through old-growth forest. You get the occasional deer, sometimes foxes. Never saw another person on those trails, not once. That morning it was cold, maybe mid-20s, and overcast. Snow had fallen a few days earlier, but not much. The trail was frozen solid, enough that my shoes crunched but didn't sink. I left the house a little after 7. I always ran the same loop, up the hill, around the ridgeline, then back down near the old hunting shack with the caved-in roof. I didn't bring my phone, just had my headlamp on, more out of habit than anything. It wasn't dark, just gray, the kind of quiet where the air feels padded. About a mile in, I started getting that weird pressure in my ears. Not painful, just the kind of thing that makes you swallow a few times. I thought maybe it was the altitude, but I'd done this route 100 times and never felt it before. I paused for a second and looked around. Nothing moved. No wind. No birds either. I shook it off and kept going. I rounded a bend, and that's when I saw it. There was a figure standing just off the trail, maybe 20 feet into the trees. Still as a post. I didn't stop running at first. I slowed, but kept my pace out of instinct, I guess. The thing that caught me was the suit. Full body, silver or metallic. Not bulky like a hazmat suit, more fitted, like something between a wetsuit and a jumpsuit. No markings, just smooth and seamless, like it was made of one piece. It was facing the trail. I didn't see a face. Could have been a helmet, or maybe the material was just reflective. No movement. No reaction. Just standing there, straight-backed, arms at its sides. I passed it in maybe 3 seconds. My brain was still catching up, trying to process what I'd seen. I stopped about 50 feet down the trail, heart hammering, and turned around. It was gone. There was nothing there. Not even the shimmer of the suit through the trees. I walked back to the spot. The snow had patches, like not full coverage, but enough to see footprints. Mine were clear on the trail. Off the path, nothing. No prints, no broken twigs, nothing out of place. I stood there for a good 10 minutes, scanning the woods. It was dead silent, the kind of quiet that buzzes in your head. Eventually, I turned and ran home. I didn't finish the loop. The whole way back, I kept checking over my shoulder. Never saw anything. That night, I tried to write it off. Maybe it was light reflecting off something. Maybe a hunter in some weird gear. But no one hunts that stretch. It's privately owned land, and the guy who leases it to the logging company lives out of state. And even if someone had been out there, they'd have left tracks. There was just no way. The next morning, I went back, same time. I brought my phone and tried to retrace my steps. The woods felt off. I don't know how else to say it. Like the colors were a little duller, like there was static in the air. I walked slow, scanning every spot where I thought the figure had been. And then I heard this sound, faint and high, like someone blowing across the top of a bottle, but constant. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It just sort of hovered in the air, steady as a dial tone. It stopped after maybe 15 seconds. When I got to the bend in the trail, I stepped off into the trees where I thought I'd seen it. Ground was still frozen. No signs anyone had ever stood there. No scuffs. No impressions in the moss. I crouched down and tried to imagine how something could stand there without leaving a trace. I couldn't come up with anything. For a few days, I stayed off the trail, jogged the road instead, but I kept thinking about it. How still it was. How perfectly straight its posture had been. Like it wasn't a person wearing something. It was something that didn't need to move the way people do. A week later, I gave in and went back to the loop. Middle of the day, full sun, no clouds. It felt more normal. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. But as I came back down near the hunting shack, I noticed a sapling that had been bent at the base. Like something heavy had stepped on it. Fresh bend, sap still wet. It was about the same height as where I'd seen the figure. I took a photo, but it just looks like a broken twig in a patch of snow. Could have been a deer, I guess. After that, I started running later in the day when the sun was higher. Nothing weird happened again, but I always got nervous near that stretch, especially when it was quiet. The woods out there don't carry sound well. It's like things just get swallowed up. I moved out that spring, not because of that, just job stuff. But I never told anyone about the thing I saw, not even my sister. I've played it back in my head 100 times. I can picture the exact shape of it, the way the light slid across the suit. How it didn't even flinch as I ran past, like it wasn't surprised to see me, like it had been standing there a long time, waiting. I woke up to the same old rooster crowing at 5:30 a.m., but something felt off. Not the usual I'm too tired kind of off, but a quiet kind of wrong. I shuffled into the kitchen of my farmhouse just outside Twin Oaks, Nebraska, and grabbed my phone to check the trail cams I set up around the property. I use them to keep an eye on deer and coyotes mostly, but they've caught some strange things before. Nothing I could explain, but nothing wild either, just the usual wildlife stuff. That morning, I was met with a blank screen on every single camera app. Usually I get a stream or at least some images from the night before, but all of them were wiped clean. No photos, no videos, nothing. Just empty folders where the files should have been. I thought it was a glitch at first. Maybe the SD cards had corrupted overnight or the batteries died all at once. But that made no sense. I changed the batteries 2 weeks ago, and the cameras all have separate power sources. They're spread out over my 120-acre farm, so there's no way they all died simultaneously. I grabbed my truck keys and headed out before breakfast. The sky was overcast, thick gray clouds rolling in low, promising rain later. It was one of those damp, quiet mornings where the world feels muffled. I drove the gravel paths that cut through the fields toward each cam's location to check them in person. The first cam was on the edge of the north pasture, about 50 yards from the tree line. When I got there, the camera looked normal enough, mounted on an old oak, lens clear of dirt and leaves. I popped off the back cover to check the card. It was clean, completely wiped. No files, just empty space. No sign of physical damage, no moisture inside. The batteries were full. I checked the second cam near the creek. Same deal. Wiped clean, batteries fine, no damage. I stopped at all 6 cams, scattered across different spots near woods and open fields. Each memory card was completely empty. No photos from the night before, no motion triggers, nothing. That's when I remembered something. I have a habit of checking the last few frames captured before a cam stops recording. Usually, it's just a blurry deer or the tail of a raccoon disappearing into the brush. I figured maybe there'd be something on the last clip before the files got erased. Back at the house, I plugged in the cards to my laptop. I pulled up the recent files folder for each, and there it was, the last saved frame before everything went blank. On every card, the last image showed the same thing. A bright, metallic reflection flickering between the trees. Not a deer, not a coyote, not a person. Just this unidentifiable shiny blur, shifting in among the trunks and branches, catching whatever little light there was through the cloud cover. The images were grainy, taken with night vision, but the reflection had an unnatural quality. It wasn't like any animal's eyes or wet fur glinting in the dark. It looked more like polished metal, curved and smooth. I kept flipping through frames leading up to that last image, but nothing else showed the reflection. It was like it had appeared suddenly, only in those final moments before the cameras wiped themselves. I called my brother Evan, who helps me around the farm sometimes. I told him what I'd found and asked if he'd seen anything strange recently. "Nope," he said, voice flat and a little skeptical. "Just the usual. Coyotes howling at night, raccoons tearing up the feed, nothing shiny or metal." I figured I might have been seeing things, but then I started noticing other weird stuff. That afternoon, I was walking near the old fence line by the West Woods when my dog, a lanky hound named Chester, suddenly froze and stared off into the trees. Chester's usually calm, but he started low growling, hackling his back hair. I called him, but he didn't move. The woods were quiet, too quiet, actually. No birds chirping, no rustling leaves, nothing. I took a few steps forward, and the hairs on my neck stood up. The air felt thick and cold, even though the day was humid. I looked toward the tree line again and thought I saw something flicker between the trunks. Not quite a shape, but a shimmer like metal reflecting the dull light. Chester finally barked once, low and sharp, then bolted back toward the truck like something spooked him badly. I didn't argue. We got in and drove home. That night, I double-checked the cams again, but no new images had been captured since the wipe. My phone battery was dying, so I set it to charge and left the porch light on. I sat outside with Chester, who stayed close. The rain started gently around 10 p.m., the drops soft on the tin roof. The farm was dark except for the porch light and the occasional flash of lightning in the distance. Around midnight, Chester suddenly stiffened and started growling again. I turned off the porch light to see better into the yard. Nothing looked out of place until I caught a glimpse of something moving near the tree line on the far side of the field. It was too dark to see details, but there was that same flicker of metal just on the edge of my vision. It didn't move like an animal. It hovered or shifted unnaturally slow, like it wasn't really bound by gravity. I grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the spot, but whatever it was disappeared instantly. No noise, no rustling, just gone. I stayed up for hours after that, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I thought about the wiped cameras, the reflection, Chester's behavior. None of it made sense. In the morning, I checked the cameras again. The memory cards were still wiped clean. I tried swapping them out, changing batteries, but nothing changed. I haven't touched those spots near the woods since, and I keep the cameras aimed more toward the open fields now. Chester stays close when we're outside, and sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I hear something faint moving just beyond the trees, quiet enough that I can't tell what it is. The reflection hasn't shown up again, not like before. But I keep thinking about those last frames on the cameras. The same shiny blur on every card. Exactly the same. I don't know what it was, and honestly, I don't want to find out. I was about halfway through my usual Saturday morning routine. Coffee brewing, dog circling my feet, the kind of quiet hum that settles into a small suburban house, when my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, which wasn't unusual since I get a fair share of wrong calls or spam. I figured it would be another robotic sales pitch, so I almost didn't bother listening. But something made me check it right then. The message was just static and clicking noises, nothing else. I sat there staring at the phone, confused. I hit replay, volume up, but it was just the same low static, mixed with sharp clicking sounds spaced out in an odd rhythm. It wasn't like any interference I'd ever heard before. Usually static is just a constant hiss or crackle, but this was deliberate, like someone was tapping something out. I'm a software engineer by trade and I like puzzles, so I saved the voicemail and started playing around with the audio file. I pulled it up on a spectrogram, basically a visual of the frequencies over time. The clicks showed up as these repeating spikes, almost like Morse code. I didn't know Morse, but it looked patterned, too neat to be random. Curious, I ran it through a frequency analyzer and did some trial decoding. After a couple hours of messing with it, I pulled out a sequence that kept repeating itself. When I cross-checked the numbers, they looked suspiciously like coordinates, not just random numbers, specific latitude and longitude points. The coordinates pointed somewhere in the northern Rockies near Glacier National Park. I didn't know anyone up there. No reason for someone to send me coordinates like that, especially hidden in static. I called my friend Nate, who's a radio hobbyist, to see if he could make sense of it. He told me it was definitely intentional, too precise to be interference or malfunction. We compared notes, and the pattern repeated exactly every 20 seconds for the full minute of the voicemail. That evening, I tried calling back the number, but it went straight to voicemail, then disconnected. Nothing came up in any online searches either. It was like the number didn't belong to anyone. The next day, I kept thinking about those coordinates. I pulled up satellite images, looked at maps. The area was remote forest, rugged mountains, no towns nearby, just a few hiking trails and some old ranger stations. Later that afternoon, I got a text from the same number. Just a single line, "Look up." I looked outside. It was just past dusk and the sky was a deep blue fading into night. I live near a park with a clear view of the horizon. I glanced up and saw a cluster of bright lights, not too high but steady, moving slowly across the sky. They weren't airplanes or drones. No blinking navigation lights, just a silent, glowing formation shifting with a smooth rhythm. I blinked and looked away for a second, then back. The lights were gone. I figured maybe I was just tired or imagining things. But the next morning, I found a handwritten note slipped under my door. It was in neat block letters. "Coordinates are a start." I didn't recognize the handwriting. No signature. Over the next few days, I kept getting more voicemails from that number, all static and clicking, with slight variations. Each one decoded to different coordinates, all scattered through the northern Rockies, near wilderness, lakes, and old mining towns. I started driving out, following the points on the map during my free time. Each spot was quiet, deserted, mostly forest or rocky outcrops. I didn't find anything unusual on the ground. No markings, no equipment, no signs anyone had been there recently. One evening, after a long day of driving and hiking, I sat on a rock overlooking a small lake. The air was cold, the wind dead calm, and the forest around me was still. I turned my phone on to check for more messages, and there was another voicemail waiting. Static and clicks again. This time, after the usual pattern, there was a soft hiss, like air leaking out, followed by a faint hum that reminded me of a tuning fork. I sat there, feeling the dark settle around me, listening closely. The woods were silent, except for distant water dripping from pine needles. I felt watched. I scanned the tree line with a flashlight, but saw nothing. After a while, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Chester, my dog who'd been lying quietly beside me, suddenly perked up and started growling low. I shone the flashlight into the trees again, catching a glimpse of something reflecting the beam. It was quick, no shape to it, more like a flash of metal or glass. I called Chester back to my side. The feeling of being watched didn't go away, but there was no sound, no movement, just silence and shadows. I packed up and drove home. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The voicemails kept coming, always the clicks and static, with coordinates pointing to places I was pretty sure I'd already checked. The next day, I noticed my phone battery was draining faster than usual. I checked the settings. No apps running in the background, no unusual data usage. I reset the phone, but it didn't help. Later that night, the power flickered twice, and my Wi-Fi cut out for a few minutes. I looked out the window and saw the same cluster of lights from before, low in the sky again. They hovered there for maybe a minute before fading away. No sound, no trail. I'm still not sure what to make of all this. The voicemails stopped after a week, but I still find myself staring at those coordinates, wondering if I missed something or if whatever was sending them is still out there, watching. Chester won't go near the woods anymore, and neither will I. I haven't gotten any new messages since, but every now and then, when I'm out late on the porch, I catch a faint clicking noise on the wind. I don't know who's sending those messages or why, but the coordinates and the lights, they feel connected somehow. I keep waiting for the next step. I was out flying my drone just after sunset one Thursday, down near the edge of town where the farms start thinning out and the trees get patchy. The sky was clear, but those clouds that sometimes stick around after the sun goes down were hovering low, stretching out like a thin, white blanket. Not the kind you'd expect to block the view completely, but enough to catch the last light and glow faintly. I'd been practicing some new maneuvers, trying to get smoother with the controls, and figured I'd push it a little farther out than usual. My drone, a DJI Mavic Pro I'd had for about a year, has a decent range, and I was feeling confident. The spot I picked was just off a quiet gravel road, with an old barn nearby and a field beyond that where the corn had already been harvested. I like this place because it's open enough for good flying, but secluded enough that I don't have to worry about people. I was about 500 or 600 feet out, flying level, when I noticed something odd in the sky ahead. At first, it was just a small glint, like a shard of metal catching what little light was left. The clouds around it were thin and wispy, but that glint stood out sharp and bright, reflecting a cold, hard light. It didn't look like a plane, no blinking lights or moving parts, and it wasn't a star or satellite either. It was way too low for that. Curious, I pushed the drone closer. The controller showed the signal was solid, video feed crisp, no lag. I moved it slowly toward the object, wanting to get a better look. The glint didn't change shape or move. It just hovered, suspended among the clouds, perfectly still. The drone's camera angle adjusted automatically, giving me a clearer shot, but the object stayed vague, almost like a reflective surface curved in a way that distorted the clouds behind it. That's when the controls started acting up. The drone wouldn't respond smoothly. Commands to move left or right were delayed or ignored. I tried pulling back, but it kept drifting forward toward the object. The signal strength dropped from full bars to 2, then 1. The feed got choppy, the image breaking up with static lines and pixelation. I hit the return to home button, hoping it would override the interference. The drone lurched, but instead of turning back, it seemed to hover in place, stuck. The screen flashed a warning, signal lost. I could see the last frame before the feed cut out entirely. That gleaming shape, impossible to pin down, surrounded by shifting clouds. The screen went black, and the signal stayed dead for a solid 30 seconds. I was standing there, hands frozen over the controller, staring up at the clouds, trying to find that object, but there was nothing. Just the quiet field and an empty sky. Then, out of nowhere, the video feed blinked back on. The drone was nowhere near the glint anymore. The screen showed it drifting slowly back over the cornfield, but the video was scrambled. Colors distorted, static flickering across the image, shapes blurred and twisting like a bad TV signal. I tried switching channels, resetting the connection, but the distortion stayed. The drone was back in range. Its GPS signal showed a path that didn't make any sense. The recorded video file was corrupted too. Parts missing, moments skipped, a few seconds of what looked like the glint again, but in such low quality that it was impossible to tell. I landed the drone as quickly as I could. When I picked it up, I noticed the camera lens had a thin, misty film over it, like condensation, even though it was dry outside. I wiped it off with my sleeve, but it came back after a few minutes. That night, I went through the footage on my laptop. The normal parts were fine: clear sky, field, barn. But that sequence near the glint was mangled. No sound, just static and flashes of weird shapes I couldn't identify. I tried running the files through recovery software, but got nowhere. The next day, I went back to the field to check for anything strange on the ground. No footprints, no debris, nothing unusual. The barn looked the same. Even the spot where I lost signal was just empty sky and normal clouds. Later, a few friends who drone a lot told me they'd never heard of interference like that, especially out in the country where there's minimal radio traffic. One suggested maybe a weather balloon or some kind of reflective kite, but I checked around. No balloons scheduled and nothing visible on the ground. Weeks passed, and the incident felt more like a weird glitch, except I can't explain the sudden loss and return of control, or the object's total disappearance from the sky. Sometimes when I'm flying now, I get this feeling like something's watching just beyond the edge of the feed. And every once in a while, when it's the sun just right at dusk, I swear I see that same glint. But when I look closer, there's never anything there. We were at a little campground near Lake Ouachita, first week of October. Not peak season, so it was quiet. Just a handful of other RVs scattered along the loop, mostly older couples. Our spot was tucked back, with the lake maybe 50 yards downhill through some pines and brush. No hookups, dry camping, just us, the dog, and a small campfire if we wanted one. We got there on a Friday afternoon. Weather was decent, high 60s during the day, dropped into the 40s at night. I'd brought my old Jayco pop-up and parked it near the back edge of the site, facing the trees. Our lab mix, Tiller, settled in fast. He loves the woods, always sniffing around like he's working security detail. That second night was when it happened. Saturday. We'd grilled hot dogs, had a couple beers, and turned in early, maybe 9:30. I was lying on the fold-out bed, scrolling through my phone while Chelsea read by headlamp. We didn't have much signal out there, just a couple bars if I stood by the window. Then everything blinked off. No click, no dimming, just instant dead. Her headlamp, my phone, the little LED reading light on the ceiling. All of it, all at once. I sat up and asked if she'd hit something by accident. She said no, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. I reached for my phone again. Wouldn't even light up, dead like it hadn't been charged in days. Same with the backup flashlight we kept near the door. Tiller started whining, not barking, whining. Low, restless sound, pacing between the door and the window like he didn't know where to look. Chelsea zipped up her jacket and went to open the door. I followed her out and we stepped down onto the gravel. It was almost totally quiet. Not silent, there were still crickets I think, but something felt flattened. Like all the usual nighttime layers were stripped out. No distant frogs from the lake, no rustling in the brush, just this odd still hush. Then we saw the lights. They were above the tree line, maybe 100 yards off, moving slow. Not plain slow, slower, like someone dragging a spoon through syrup. 3 of them. Bright white, but not harsh. More like a distant floodlight through fog, except there was no fog. The lights stayed level with each other, spaced out in a triangle. No blinking, no color change. Just this steady drift across the sky. We stood there watching, not speaking. Tiller had sat down by then, but he was trembling. I tried my phone again, still nothing. Chelsea reached for hers, same result. The lights moved behind a clump of taller pines, disappeared for a second, then reappeared farther along like they were making a shallow arc over the lake. I remember thinking it looked way too low for any kind of plane, and too slow. There was no engine sound, no hum, nothing. After maybe 30 seconds, the lights stopped. They just hung there. Chelsea whispered, "Go get the camera." I nodded and climbed back into the Jayco, rummaging for the little cannon we keep in the side cabinet. It's nothing fancy, just a point and shoot, but it's digital, and I knew the battery had been charged before we left. I brought it out, pointed it toward the lights, hit the power button, nothing. Completely dead. Tried it again, then flipped open the battery cover to make sure it hadn't somehow come loose. Everything was in place. It just wouldn't turn on. That's when we noticed the RV was completely dark. Even when we weren't using any systems, there's always a faint glow from the fridge panel or the battery monitor. Those were out too. No power. And we weren't plugged in, but the house battery was full when we parked. It should have been enough to keep basics running all weekend. Chelsea stepped back toward the door and reached inside to feel for the switch panel. She flipped a few. Nothing. Tiller was whining again. I don't know how long we stood there. The lights didn't move, didn't wobble or change color, just hung in place like they were watching us, though that sounds stupid to say. Then they started moving again. Not away. Straight up. Slowly at first, still no sound, then a little faster. In maybe 5 seconds, they were higher than the trees, then higher than the ridge. Another 10 seconds, and they were just tiny points above the lake. Then they blinked out, one at a time. Left, right, center. Like someone flipping off switches. As soon as the last one disappeared, the crickets came back. I didn't notice it until that moment, but it was like someone had turned the world back on. The breeze kicked up again. A branch cracked somewhere off in the woods. Tiller stood and stretched, then walked to the water bowl like nothing happened. Chelsea went inside and tried the overhead light again. It flicked on. Dim at first, then back to normal. My phone buzzed with a delayed notification, and the Canon powered on like nothing had ever been wrong. Everything was working again. I checked the house battery display, 95%. Same as the day before. I checked the fuses, the inverter, everything. Nothing tripped, nothing fried. Chelsea didn't want to stay another night, and honestly, I didn't either. We packed up in the morning and drove out. I told the ranger at the gate that we'd had an equipment issue and cut the weekend short. He didn't ask questions. Back home, I charged the Canon fully and tried taking a few test shots. Worked fine, no issues. I went to plug my phone in and found it at 67%, exactly where it had been before it died. It wasn't like the battery had drained, it just shut off. Same with the RV systems. I even took it to a buddy who does repairs, had him test the battery and solar controller. All clean. No faults. We haven't been back to that campground since. Tiller still gets jittery around flashlights, which he never did before. Chelsea keeps the camera in a drawer now and hasn't touched it since. I was about 10 years into the job when it happened. Worked night shift with the Oregon State Police, mostly covering stretches of Highway 197 north of Maupin. It's a dead stretch most of the time. Just wheat fields, some sagebrush, the odd ranch driveway. Not a lot of action except for the occasional drunk or jackknife trailer. That night I was parked off a turnout near mile marker 42, just past this narrow bridge that dips down into a little canyon. It was maybe 3:30 in the morning. Cold and clear, no wind. Stars were bright, real bright, because there's no light pollution out there. I'd turned off the cruiser, lights and everything, just drinking my gas station coffee and listening to dispatch in case something came over. It was one of those nights where nothing was going on, not even truckers. At some point I realized the radio static had gone dead, not just quiet like the signal had cut. Usually I'd get at least a little chatter from the Dalles station, even if it was faint. I tapped the unit a couple times, tried the mic, nothing. Figured maybe I'd gotten out of range for a minute, so I stepped out of the car and started walking a few feet down the shoulder, holding up the antenna to see if it picked back up. That's when I saw it. It was up to my left, maybe a few hundred feet in the air. Could have been more, it was hard to judge. A triangle, with lights on each point. No blinking, just steady. Each one glowed white but not harsh, like soft halogen. The shape was totally still. No sound. I remember thinking it was like someone had drawn it there with a ruler. At first, I thought maybe it was a drone or some new kind of surveillance craft, but it was huge. Way too big for anything like that. Bigger than a house. I stood there staring at it for a while, not even thinking to reach for my phone. It just didn't move. Didn't wobble or drift. Just hovered perfectly still, like gravity didn't apply to it. I kept looking around, half expecting someone to jump out and yell that it was some kind of test or prank, but there was nothing. No other cars, no wind, just this triangular thing sitting in the sky like it belonged there. It didn't change shape or glow or pulse, just sat there. Then, after what felt like 5 minutes, though it could have been less, it vanished. I don't mean it zoomed off. I don't mean it shot upward or faded into the distance. It was there, and then it wasn't. No transition, no movement. 1 second it was a triangle hanging in the sky, and the next second it was just empty stars again. I stood there frozen for a solid minute. Eventually, I walked back to the cruiser, got in, and turned everything back on. Radio was working again, normal static, same dispatch feed, no log of interruption. I didn't call it in, I just sat there with the engine running and not gripping the wheel. I didn't leave the turnout for another hour. I kept looking at the sky, waiting to see it again, but there was nothing, just stars and the occasional satellite passing overhead. A few days later, I mentioned it to another trooper during shift change. Holland, guy from Bend who transferred in for a few months. I didn't say I'd seen a triangle, just that I thought I saw something weird in the sky. He got quiet for a second and then asked, "Was it real quiet when it happened? Like, nothing worked?" I asked him what he meant, and he kind of shrugged it off, said he'd seen strange lights out near Shiniko before, wouldn't elaborate. The more I thought about it, the less I could explain what I'd seen. I went back to the same turnout a few more times after that, same shift, same time. Never saw anything again. But I started noticing this thing where every once in a while my dash cam would skip. Just a blip, like a second or two missing. Usually around 3 a.m., always when I was on those remote stretches. I took one of the units in for diagnostics, but they said everything looked normal. That part might not mean anything. Could be equipment failure, could be nothing. But that triangle, it wasn't a plane. I know aircraft, I know what they sound like, how they move, what they look like at night. This thing didn't behave like anything I'd ever seen. No rotors, no engine noise, no movement. Just existed for a few minutes and then didn't. I don't have any theories, I didn't report it officially. I still patrol that stretch sometimes, though I transfer next spring. I keep one eye on the sky more than I used to. That's about all I can say. I've always been the kind of guy who liked looking up at the sky. Not in some poetic way or anything, just a practical hobby. I've got this old telescope my dad handed down, and on clear nights, I'd set it up in the backyard of my house out in western Montana, just past the edge of the little town where I live. It's quiet there, not a lot of light pollution, so the stars pop out pretty clear. Nothing fancy, just me, a thermos of coffee, and the sky. One night in early October, the air had that crisp edge you expect right before the first frost. The kind where you can see your breath, but it's not quite cold enough to make your fingers numb. I was out around 9:30 p.m. scanning the usual constellations, trying to catch the Andromeda Galaxy, but mostly just killing time and enjoying the silence. My dog, Jasper, a big mutt with more fur than sense, was dozing nearby. I was focused on a patch of sky near Cygnus when something caught my eye. It looked like a star, but it was brighter and kind of hung there in the same spot longer than a shooting star would. What struck me was that every few minutes, this light shifted, just a little, maybe a couple degrees east or west. It wasn't the usual movement you get from satellites or planes because it didn't follow a steady path and it didn't blink like airplanes do. I figured it might be a satellite, maybe the ISS or something, but this wasn't moving in a smooth line. It was more like it was hovering, then sliding over, then hovering again. It didn't make sense, but I thought, okay, maybe some weird atmospheric thing, or maybe I was seeing things. I kept watching for about an hour, noting the changes. Every time it shifted, it was subtle, enough that if you weren't paying close attention, you'd just think it was a twinkle or the normal jitter stars have. But I wasn't imagining it. I even tracked the position on my phone with a star map app. The star map didn't recognize it. Nothing showed up in that spot except regular stars, which shouldn't move like this. Next, I wanted to show my wife, Anna. She's not into astronomy, but likes looking at the stars with me occasionally. I called her out to the backyard, and Jasper perked up, sensing something was different. I pointed at the spot in the sky where the light had been shifting. I swear, just as she came outside and looked up, the light vanished. Gone. No flicker, no blink, no trail, just nothing. I shrugged it off and said maybe I was seeing things, but Anna was curious. The next night, I went out again to the same spot. The star was back. Same brightness, same slow shifting movement. I tried to call Anna outside again. This time, I waited until she was there, standing right beside me. We watched together for almost 10 minutes, and the light just stayed fixed. No shifting this time. Then suddenly, it disappeared again. Just like that, no warning. Anna said she didn't see it move before it vanished, which made it even weirder. How could something shift so much one night, then be still the next, and then vanish the moment someone else was watching? I started getting a little obsessed. I stayed out late several nights in a row, tracking this thing. Sometimes it was there, sometimes not. One night, it shifted sharply to the south, more than I'd seen before, and that's when I noticed something else. The forest behind my house, which is usually quiet at night except for owls or coyotes, went completely silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, no animal sounds. Even Jasper was still. The quiet stretched for a good 10 minutes. Then the light shifted back north and the night noises returned like a switch flipped on. I can't explain it, but it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. I started taking notes. The light would sometimes blink faintly, almost like a signal, but nothing I could decode. Other times, it just sat there like a cold eye watching me. I couldn't tell if it was alive or a machine or something else. One night, I decided to try filming it with my phone. I propped it up on the picnic table, zoomed in, and started recording. The image was grainy, of course, but you could see the light clearly. It moved slowly again, sliding east, then west. But as I watched the recording later, the light wasn't there. The video just showed a normal star field, nothing out of place. I played it back over and over, zooming in and out, but no sign of the shifting light. That threw me off. How could something I saw clearly just not show up on video? A few nights after that, I was out again and the light was there as usual. I called my neighbor, old Mr. Duncan, to come look. He's a retired electrician, sharp as a tack, and usually skeptical of this kind of stuff. He came out, and we watched the light together. This time, it shifted slowly toward the horizon, dipping lower and lower. Then, as if it didn't want to be seen, it started to flicker in and out, like a faulty bulb. Then it vanished. Mr. Duncan swore it was the weirdest thing he'd seen in his 70 years. The next day, I found something odd on my phone again. A series of notifications that I hadn't opened. They were from an astronomy app I'd installed ages ago, but never used much. The notification said things like, object detected and unknown object near Cygnus. The timestamps matched the nights when the light showed up. I never got any alerts from the app before, and it hadn't been updated recently. It felt like the app was suddenly watching the sky in a way it hadn't before. After a week of this, the light stopped showing up entirely. I stayed out every night until dawn, but saw nothing in that part of the sky. The forest was noisy again. Jasper chasing raccoons and birds in the bushes like usual. I still look up at that spot sometimes, wondering if it's still there, just waiting. I haven't told many people about it because I don't want to sound crazy, and honestly, I don't have answers. All I know is that sometimes in the quiet of a cold Montana night, the stars don't behave the way you think they should. I work at a small local radio station out here in Pine Ridge, Nebraska. Not much happens around here. Mostly country music, the occasional high school football game, and the weather report. The station's little more than a shed with some basic equipment, and the antenna's perched on a rickety old tower behind it. Nothing fancy, but it's my job, and I like it well enough. One late September night, about 2 months ago, I was the only one on shift. My coworker Jenna had taken the evening off, so I was stuck running the overnight broadcast alone. It was the kind of night where the wind picked up just enough to rattle the windows, but it wasn't cold yet. The air smelled like dry grass and the faint hint of wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. Around 11:30 p.m., I was flipping through the bands, just messing around to kill time between songs. I was scanning through AM and shortwave frequencies when something caught my ear, a faint, repetitive sound, almost like a machine cycling through some sort of code. It was rhythmic but not musical, like a slow series of mechanical clicks or beeps. It repeated over and over, with a pause, then started again. I adjusted the dial to clear it up a little, but it didn't get much better. The signal was weak and crackly, but definitely there. It didn't sound like any radio station or broadcast I'd ever heard. I tried to record it on my phone, just so I could play it back later, but as soon as I hit record, the signal disappeared. Thinking it was a glitch, I let it go. But a few minutes later, the same pattern came back, clearer this time. I grabbed a notebook and started jotting down what I could hear. Click, pause, click, click, pause, click. It reminded me a bit of Morse code, but without the dots and dashes. Just this mechanical ticking. I called Jenna the next day to see if she'd ever heard anything like it, but she said no. Neither did the other local stations or the regional news guys I checked with. Everyone was scratching their heads. No one could figure out where the signal was coming from. That's when a couple of listeners got involved. One of them was a guy named Russell, a retired radio technician who lived on the edge of town. He had a setup for tracking signals and insisted on trying to triangulate the source. Over the next week, he set up his gear and narrowed down the signal to somewhere outside of town, in the open farmland beyond Miller's Road, near an old abandoned field that used to be part of a farm decades ago. Nobody goes out there anymore. It's just a wide patch of overgrown grass and weeds with a few scraggly trees. There's no power lines, no houses, nothing but fields that stretch out for miles. One night, Russell invited me to come with him to check it out. It was a Tuesday, clear sky, maybe 45 degrees out, with a thin fog starting to settle in as the sun went down. I brought my flashlight and my dog, a brown mutt named Dottie. She's usually pretty chill, but she seemed nervous that night, sticking close to me and growling softly at the shadows. We parked on the gravel shoulder at the edge of the field, like the only spot where our headlights didn't blind us. The radio in Russell's car was picking up the signal clearly now, louder than ever, but still with that weird mechanical rhythm. We both stepped out, the grass crunching underfoot. I swear the air felt heavier there, like it wasn't just the fog, but something pressing down. Dottie stopped growling, but kept her ears pointed forward, staring into the darkness beyond the trees. Russell fiddled with his receiver, trying to pinpoint exactly where the signal was strongest. The signal moved a little as we walked, fading a bit in spots, then jumping again, as if it was coming from a small area but hard to fix on. We kept walking slowly, deeper into the field. That's when I noticed it. Just past a thicket of thorn bushes, there was this weird patch of ground where the grass was flattened. It wasn't from people walking or animals, at least not recently. It looked almost like it had been pressed down in a perfect circle, about 10 feet across. We stood there for a minute, the signal pulsing in our ears. Then Russell asked if I heard anything else, like a hum or vibration. I strained my ears, but just caught the wind rustling the tall grass and a distant train whistle. Suddenly, the signal stopped. Not faded or crackling out, just vanished. Russell checked his equipment, but there was nothing now except static. I shone my flashlight around, the beams slicing through the fog, but everything looked normal. No movement, no lights, nothing unusual except the flattened circle in the grass. We stayed for another 20 minutes, waiting for it to come back. Nothing. The fog was thicker now, and the night felt cold, even though the thermometer said otherwise. On the way back to the car, Dottie froze, ears stiff and tail low, staring at something off in the shadows. I shined my light that way, but saw nothing but darkness between the trees. Russell said maybe we'd stumbled on some kind of old transmitter left over from the Cold War or some experimental equipment, but neither of us knew how that would explain the signal suddenly stopping or that strange flattened patch. Over the next few days, the signal returned several times, always around the same hour, between 11 and midnight. The pattern never changed, and every time, the moment I or Russell tried to record or get close, it vanished like it wasn't there at all. I told a couple of other folks at the station, but they just shrugged it off as interference or a prank. I don't know. The strangest part, the night after we visited the field, I started hearing weird static on our station even during the day. Not the normal interference from storms or electrical lines, but that same mechanical rhythm, faint but unmistakable. It never lasted long, and no one else ever seemed to hear it. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, hidden in the field, or maybe wandering the radio waves, waiting for someone to listen. Dottie won't go near the back window at night anymore, and I don't blame her. Neither do I. I was out near my family's cabin up in northern Manitoba one November evening, trying to catch the Aurora again. The sky was unusually clear for that time of year, crisp and cold, with that sharp wind you get when the snow's just starting to stick but hasn't quite settled yet. I bundled up, grabbed my phone, and set out across the frozen lake. I wanted to get away from the little lights of the cabin so I could get a better view. The northern lights had been flickering off and on all night, mostly green waves stretching across the sky with some hints of purple at the edges. I've watched them a lot over the years, but that night they were more active than usual, pulsing and folding like someone was painting the sky in slow motion. I started filming because I figured maybe I'd catch something worth saving. I've never been much for professional photography, just an amateur with a shaky hand and a fascination for the weird beauty of the sky. As the light show moved, my phone kept recording, and I let the cold seep into my fingers while I focused on the screen. About 10 minutes in, I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. There was a dark shape drifting against the wind up high, just barely visible against the faint glow of the aurora. I thought at first it might be a bird, but it was moving way too slowly for a bird and way too high. Too slow for a plane, too silent to be a helicopter. And there was no flashing light, no navigation strobes, nothing you'd expect from anything man-made. I shifted the camera to get it in frame. The shape didn't have a clear form, more like a shadow, a black silhouette that didn't reflect any light. It moved smoothly, like it was gliding me, but it was going the opposite direction of the wind, which made no sense at all. I tried to tell myself it was a cloud, but clouds don't move like that, especially not in the middle of a clear night sky with no other clouds around. And it didn't drift, it moved deliberately. It was almost hypnotic, this slow, quiet glide. My dog, Miko, a lean husky mix, stood close by and watched too, ears pricked, tail low. She's usually calm at night, but this time she growled softly and wouldn't stop looking up. It felt like she was as uneasy about this as I was. I kept filming for maybe another 5 minutes, and the shape stayed visible the whole time, moving steadily across the sky. I could swear it was moving towards the horizon near the tree line, but it didn't disappear or get smaller the way a plane or bird would. It just kept that same distance and size, like it was hovering but also sliding sideways. Then, the strangest thing happened. The shape seemed to pause in midair for a couple of seconds, like it was waiting or watching. The aurora pulsed right behind it, lighting up the sky in bright green and violet waves. It felt like the dark shape was outlined by the lights, but didn't respond to them. I called out softly to Miko, trying to get her attention away from whatever this was, but she didn't move. She just kept staring up, low growl turning into a whine. I didn't feel like moving closer or stepping away, just frozen, watching the thing hang there. Then suddenly it shifted speed and started moving faster, still smooth but faster. It headed towards the tree line and disappeared behind the thin stand of pines. I stood there for a minute after that, breath visible in the cold air, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. The wind had shifted back to its usual direction by then, but everything felt quieter. Even the snow under my boots sounded muffled. When I got back to the cabin and checked the video, the dark shape was there, moving just like I remembered. But on playback, it had this weird quality, almost like a shadow that flickered, sometimes blurring into the light and sometimes sharp against the aurora. The closer I looked, the less I was sure what I was seeing. That night, I kept hearing strange noises outside, low hums that weren't the wind or the usual forest sounds. Miko stayed close, ears twitching, and I wasn't about to argue with her instincts. The next morning, the snow around the cabin was disturbed in odd patterns, like something heavy had moved through but didn't leave clear tracks. Nothing in the forest looked broken or trampled, just strange impressions that didn't make sense for any animal I know. I've gone back since, on other clear nights, hoping to see the shape again or understand what it was, but it never showed up. Just the usual northern lights dancing across the sky, quiet and bright. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but Miko's behavior that night was different from anything I've seen before. She won't go near that part of the lake anymore, especially on windy nights. I keep the video saved, but watching it feels weird, like the shape is there and not there at the same time, something that doesn't belong but won't say what it is. I was out in the back fields behind my house again, lying flat on my back in the cool grass, staring up at the stars. It was a late summer night in rural Wisconsin, the kind where the air is still warm, but the crickets have started their nighttime chorus. The sky was clear, a perfect blanket of stars without a single cloud to spoil the view. My dog, a wiry terrier named Gus, was curled up a few feet away near the edge of the cornfield, half asleep but alert. I'd been doing this a lot lately, just escaping out here after dinner when no one was around, hoping to catch some shooting stars or just clear my head. I'm Noah, by the way, just a regular 16-year-old with a knack for astronomy, or at least I like to think so. I had my phone propped beside me, not playing music or anything, just sitting there so I could check the time now and then. That night, I was trying to spot the Perseids meteor shower, which was supposed to be at its peak. I kept my eyes peeled, waiting for the occasional streak across the sky. But after a while, the crickets and wind seemed to fade into some kind of heavy silence. The air felt thicker, like it was holding its breath, and I found myself zoning out, my gaze locked on this one bright cluster of stars near the horizon. Then everything went black. I don't mean like falling asleep. It was like the world just blinked out for a second. I remember lying there, eyes open, but the stars disappeared, and my body felt weightless and disconnected, like floating in space. It only lasted a few seconds, or at least that's what it felt like. But when I came back, everything felt off. The grass beneath me was still cool and Gus was still there, but he was standing now, ears perked, staring toward the far edge of the field, like he'd heard something strange. I sat up slowly, blinking against the dark. My phone lay right next to me. I grabbed it to check the time, thinking maybe I'd nodded off or something, and that's when I noticed something weird. The screen showed it was almost 11:15 p.m., but the last time I checked was around 9:40. I blinked a few times, convinced it was a glitch or maybe I was imagining it, but the lock screen still showed the right date and everything else looked normal. I looked around, trying to make sense of it. There were no cars on the road, no porch lights, nothing. The only sound was Gus sniffing the grass near me and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. I stood up and stretched, my legs a little stiff. I asked Gus if he wanted to go home, and he wagged his tail, but stayed on alert. I took a few steps toward the farmhouse, but the feeling didn't go away, like something was watching me from the shadows just beyond the tree line. I figured maybe I'd spaced out and just lost track of time, but a full hour and a half? That didn't make sense. I wasn't that tired, and I was wide awake right before the blackout. And Gus wouldn't have just stood there so still if I'd been out cold that long. I pulled out my phone to see if the Photos app had anything from the night. I sometimes snap pictures of the sky, hoping to catch a meteor or the Milky Way's faint glow. But the last photo I took was the one I snapped right before the blackout. The timestamp matched 9:40. Nothing after that. No random pictures, no accidental videos, nothing. I started walking back toward the house, telling Gus to keep close. As I passed the edge of the cornfield, I caught a faint flicker of light, like a tiny flash behind the trees. But when I looked directly, it was gone. Back inside, I told my parents I'd lost track of time out in the field. They just smiled and said I should get to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something happened out there, like the night itself had folded in on me for a while. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about the blackout and the missing time. I talked about it with a couple of friends, but they just laughed it off. Probably just dozed off, one said. But I knew it wasn't sleep. I checked my phone's activity log and my text messages. No calls, no messages during that gap. Even my fitness tracker didn't record any steps for that time. It was like I vanished from time for 90 minutes and then popped back in with no explanation. Sometimes at night, when I'm lying in bed, I can still feel that weightless, disconnected moment when the blackout hit, like a door closing in my mind and then snapping open again. I've gone back to that field a few times since, staring up at the stars, hoping to figure out what happened. Gus comes with me, always alert near the tree line, but nothing else has ever happened. Just the usual quiet, the same familiar stars. Still, every now and then I find myself checking my phone to make sure time is still moving the way it should. I got home around 9:30 on a Sunday night. The sky was overcast, low, thick clouds pressing down, making the whole neighborhood feel quieter than usual. I lived in a small house on the edge of a quiet suburb in Eugene, Oregon. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, and the backyard was my favorite part. I liked working on little projects out there, tinkering with bikes, gardening, that sort of thing. I kept all my tools and some old camping gear in the shed at the back. It wasn't big, just your standard metal roof, wooden walls, nothing special. That night, I pulled into the driveway, shut the car off, and noticed something right away. The shed door was wide open. Not the kind of open where the wind just pushed it ajar, but fully open, like someone had come and swung it wide. I froze for a second, which was weird because I wasn't usually jumpy. The street was empty, no cars parked, and all the house lights were off except mine. I didn't hear anything. No voices, no footsteps. I figured maybe I forgot to close it that morning, but I was sure I shut it tight before leaving. I grabbed a flashlight from the car and walked toward the shed. The grass was damp from earlier rain, and the smell of wet earth mixed with the faint scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I kept my dog, a golden retriever named Juno, on a leash. She was usually calm but alert, and tonight she seemed on edge, her tail low and her ears flat. When I got to the shed, the door creaked as I pushed it back closed, then flipped on the flashlight and aimed it at the roof. That's when I saw the holes. They were perfectly round, maybe the size of a quarter, burned through the metal in a neat pattern. There were about 6 of them, all clustered near the middle, no jagged edges or dents, just clean, precise circles with scorched edges like they'd been melted from the outside. I'd never seen anything like it. The shed had been fine when I left that morning. I checked inside, worried someone had broken in or stolen something, but everything was exactly where I left it. Tools on the shelves, paint cans in the corner, the old bike frame leaning against the wall. Juno circled my feet, sniffing the air, but not barking or growling. I scanned the backyard with the flashlight, looking for footprints or anything out of place. The grass was undisturbed except for where I'd walked. I locked the shed door again, but the feeling didn't go away. Something about those holes didn't make sense. They didn't look like bullet holes or damage from hail or anything natural. It was like someone had used some kind of laser or focused heat to burn them through. I thought maybe it was some prank, but no one in the neighborhood was into that kind of thing. And besides, why burn holes in the roof without taking anything? I decided to call my neighbor, Eva, just to check if she'd seen anything weird. She was outside watering her plants, the porch light on. When I asked if she noticed anyone around or heard anything strange, she shook her head. "I did see some weird lights in the sky earlier," she said, squinting. "Weird colors, kind of like strobes, but no planes nearby. Maybe an hour ago?" That caught me off guard. I hadn't seen anything, but the clouds were thick. Eva's place was across the street, so I walked over, Juno padding behind me. We stood in her yard for a few minutes, looking up. The clouds had moved in fully by then, blocking any stars or moonlight. The air felt heavier, like right before a storm. Eva mentioned some locals had talked about strange sounds at the edge of the nearby forest, something humming, low and constant, but no one could find the source. I started to feel a little stupid, maybe paranoid, but those holes were still fresh in my mind. When I got back home, I double-checked the shed again and saw faint scorch marks on the wood beams inside, right where the holes were above. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing what sounded like a low hum outside, like something vibrating in the distance. When I peeked outside, everything looked normal. No lights, no movement, just the dark trees lining the backyard. The next morning, I showed the holes to my brother, Rick. He's a mechanic and usually good with figuring out weird stuff. He poked around the roof and said maybe some kind of welding gone wrong, but that didn't add up since I never worked on the shed with a torch. We went outside to see if the neighbors noticed anything else, but no one had. I checked local news, no reports of anything unusual. It was like those holes just appeared overnight. A few nights later, I was sitting in the backyard smoking a cigarette, Juno at my feet, when I saw it again. Above the trees, just past the tree line where the streetlights ended, a faint glow flickered. Not like a flashlight or a firefly, more like a soft light shifting colors, blue to green to a dull red, hovering just above the canopy. I grabbed my binoculars, but the glow was too faint, like it was partly hidden by the thick branches. I tried to tell myself it was a reflection or some weird drone, but the colors kept changing in a way I couldn't explain, and the light stayed still, pulsing slowly for several minutes. Juno started growling low, staring toward the trees. I didn't see any movement, but I felt watched. The next day, I found more small scorch marks near the shed foundation. They looked the same as the holes in the roof, clean burns, no ash or debris. That night, I locked all the doors and windows, but I couldn't stop thinking about the shed. I kept imagining those holes expanding or strange figures moving just beyond my sight. A week later, the holes were still there. No one else had seen anything, and nothing else had changed. I even moved some tools out just to see if anything went missing. It didn't. I thought about calling someone, maybe the fire department or the cops, but they'd probably just write it off as vandalism or weird weather damage. I didn't want to be that guy who called the cops over something he couldn't explain. So I've just been living with it. The holes are still in the roof, and some nights I swear I hear that low hum again, like a machine far away, but it's never consistent. Sometimes when I'm outside late, I catch faint flickers of light at the edge of the trees, but they vanish as soon as I blink. Juno still won't go near the shed at night, and neither will I. Whatever made those holes didn't take anything. It didn't leave footprints or clues, just those perfect little burns in the roof, like a silent message I don't understand. I was out in the woods near Priest Lake, Idaho, just before dawn. It was early October, kind of cold where your breath fogs up the camera lens if you're not careful, but the sky was clear and crisp. I'd been tracking some elk in the area for a few days, hoping to get a good shot before the rut ended. That morning, I set up near a small, quiet lake, tucked into a clearing. The water was like glass, perfectly still, reflecting the trees and sky. I had my camera on a tripod, waiting for the elk to come down to drink. It was one of those spots where nature feels totally untouched, and it usually meant hours of waiting. I was scrolling through some shots I'd taken during the night, just keeping busy, when I noticed something odd in one of the pictures. The reflection on the lake's surface showed a shiny, metallic object, almost disc-shaped, hovering right above the water. It wasn't huge, maybe 8 or 10 feet across, but definitely out of place. The weirdest part? The sky above the lake in the photo was completely clear. No clouds, no birds, no mist, nothing. I looked up from the camera and the actual sky was the same as in the photo, just an empty, pale blue morning. No object in sight. I figured maybe it was a trick of the light, some lens flare or something I hadn't noticed before, but it didn't look like anything I'd seen from reflections before. I took a few more shots, angling the camera slightly, trying to catch whatever that was from another perspective. Nothing showed up again, just the usual trees, the lake, and the sky. I packed up and started walking back toward my truck, which was parked a little over a mile away on the edge of a logging road. The woods felt quieter than usual, like the animals had all disappeared. Juno, my border collie mix, was with me. She's usually all energy, sniffing around and chasing squirrels, but she stayed close, her ears twitching every now and then, like she was hearing things I couldn't. About halfway back, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Just a quick flash between two trees. I stopped and shone my flashlight in that direction, but nothing was there. Juno growled softly and backed up against my leg. We moved on, but the feeling of being watched stuck with me. The forest was dense but still empty, and every rustle made me turn around. The sun was higher now, but the woods still felt shadowy, like the light wasn't reaching through properly. When I got to the truck, I grabbed my phone to check the photos again. I zoomed in on the weird object in the reflection. The surface looked smooth and seamless, reflecting the trees and sky in a way that didn't quite make sense. It almost looked too perfect, like some kind of metal crafted to a mirror finish. I tried calling my friend Darren, who knows a lot about optical illusions and natural phenomena. He said maybe it was a rare kind of water bug or something reflecting in a strange way, but that didn't explain the shape or size. That night, I stayed in a small cabin near the lake. I set up a camera outside, pointed at the water, hoping to catch something unusual. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange humming sound. It wasn't loud, more like a low vibration, but it felt like it was coming from just outside the cabin. I peeked out the window and saw nothing but dark trees in the still lake. The air felt thick and heavy. Juno was whining softly by my feet. I looked back at the camera footage the next morning. There was a flicker of light reflected on the water around 12:03 a.m., a quick shimmer, then nothing. No shape, no object, just a sudden flash that didn't match any natural source. I packed up and left that afternoon. I kept glancing at the photos, the reflection still sitting there on the lake, a silent, impossible thing. Whatever it was, it never showed itself directly, just that odd, metallic hint in the water. I'm still trying to figure out what I saw. I was driving through southwestern Kansas on a calm September afternoon, chasing a weather report that called for isolated thunderstorms near the Flint Hills. The sky was mostly clear, just a few thin clouds scattered across the blue. Nothing looked threatening at all. I had my rig set up, the usual radar, anemometer, electromagnetic sensors, all hooked into the laptop on my passenger seat. My dog Hobbs, a lanky Australian Shepherd mix, was curled up in the back, mostly asleep. I've been chasing storms for years, always ready for sudden changes. But that day was weird, right from the start. Around 3:15 p.m., while I was cruising on a 2-lane highway near a small town called Eureka, my instruments suddenly flickered. The usual hum from the EM sensor shot up like a radio went haywire. Static buzzed through the speakers connected to the laptop, and the display went haywire with erratic spikes. At first, I thought it was a glitch, a sensor malfunction, maybe interference from power lines or something electronic in the area. But there wasn't a power line for miles, and the laptop wasn't connected to any cell signal. I double-checked that out of habit. Then the radar picked up a dark oval shape, slowly moving just below the lowest layer of clouds. The thing is, the clouds were high and thin, with a clear sky around them. The object didn't have a radar signature that matched any known aircraft. It wasn't on any flight tracking app I had running either. I stopped the truck on the shoulder and stepped out, with Hobbs trotting beside me, ears perked and alert. The air felt heavier than usual, but the wind was still. I scanned the sky, expecting to see a plane or a weather balloon, something normal, but there was nothing up there, just the light clouds drifting lazily. I kept looking toward the horizon where the radar had indicated the oval was. For a few minutes, it didn't show up visually. Then, almost at the edge of the clouds, I noticed a dark shadow drifting slowly across the fields. It wasn't like a cloud or a bird. It was too solid, too defined. The shape was perfectly oval, and it moved silently and smoothly, like it was gliding just under the clouds. Hobbs suddenly growled low in his throat and stayed close. I didn't blame him. Something about the way that shadow hovered felt wrong. It didn't move with the wind. It moved against it, controlled and deliberate. I called the local sheriff's office just to ask if they'd gotten any calls about strange aircraft or anything unusual. The dispatcher said nothing had been reported and there were no notices for unusual flights or military exercises in the area. The electromagnetic spikes kept happening every few minutes. My laptop was having trouble processing the data. The static noise from the speakers became a low, rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat. It was oddly steady, and it seemed to sync up with the movement of that shadow below the clouds. At one point, I decided to try taking pictures with my phone. I raised the camera toward the shadow, but the screen flickered and froze for a second. When it came back, the shadow was gone. The clouds looked normal again, and the sky was empty. I walked back to my truck, feeling a weird kind of pressure on my chest, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. Hobbs stayed glued to my side, looking up and growling softly every so often. I tried to shake it off and got back on the road, but the instruments didn't go back to normal. The EM interference stayed, though it shifted in intensity. It felt like whatever was causing it was still nearby, just out of sight. That evening, I found a diner in a small town and parked outside, still watching the sky. The interference finally faded around sunset and my equipment returned to normal. Hobbs settled down in the back seat, exhausted from the tension. I kept scanning the horizon with my binoculars, but there was nothing strange in the fading light. Just the normal twinkling of distant farms and the occasional car driving by on empty roads. I got back home late that night. Even after the whole day of weird readings and that dark shadow, everything felt normal inside my apartment. But I kept thinking about that silent oval shape drifting beneath the clouds and how it vanished without a trace whenever I tried to focus on it. I don't know what it was or why it showed up when there was no storm to chase, but I keep checking the sky whenever I can. Hobbs seems to watch it too, a little more wary than usual. And that's the story. I worked night security at a manufacturing plant in North Carolina, about 20 minutes outside Asheville. Middle of nowhere, really. The plant backed up to a big stretch of undeveloped woodland, state-owned, I think. And the whole compound was fenced in, surrounded by pine and gravel and not much else. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and it was mostly quiet. We had a skeleton crew on the floor overnight, maybe 5 guys in the whole building. I was the only guard on duty. There were 16 cameras I was supposed to monitor from the office. Most of them were focused on loading docks, doors, parking lots, standard stuff. We didn't get much trouble, just the occasional raccoon setting off a motion alert or someone forgetting their badge. One camera covered the East Service Road, the narrow access lane that looped behind the building toward the woods. That feed, camera 12, was the only one that faced directly out toward the tree line, with a big patch of sky above it. The first time I noticed anything weird was in February, cold and clear that night. I remember I was halfway through a cup of instant ramen, bored out of my mind, when the camera feed flickered. It wasn't a full glitch, more like a shimmer, like heat haze or something underwater, only on that one feed. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, then it snapped back to normal. I rewound the footage, but the recording skipped over the shimmer entirely. Just cut from 2:36:59 to 2:37:02, like nothing happened. Thought it might have been a tech hiccup. We had spotty signal on a few of the older cameras, especially when it got cold. But the next night it happened again. Same camera, same exact time, 2:37 a.m. Another quick flicker, a kind of warped ripple through the background sky behind the tree line. Then back to normal. I started watching for it after that. Every single night, without fail, camera 12 glitched at exactly 2:37. Always the same shimmer in the same spot, high in the sky, near the upper right of the frame. Sometimes it lasted just a second. Other nights it stretched to 3 or 4. Never showed up in the recordings, just skipped that time entirely, like the DVR didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would care? Tech acts up, right? But it kept happening. Weeks passed and it never missed a night. The distortion stayed in the same part of the sky, too, never shifted left or right, never got closer or farther, just shimmered, then vanished. One night I stepped outside to see if I could catch it in person. Brought my thermos with me, walked out past the loading dock around 2:30. There was a thin frost on the gravel. I stood behind the fence and looked up at the trees, waiting. At 2:37, I felt something. I didn't see anything, not really. The stars stayed put. The sky looked normal, but there was this faint pressure in the air, like a low-frequency hum you couldn't hear, only feel. My chest tightened. The hair on my arms stood up. It wasn't cold. It was something else. Like the atmosphere changed for a second, like everything went off balance. Then it passed. Just like that. I went back inside and checked the feed. Sure enough, the camera had shimmered again. I started keeping a log after that. Dates, times, weather conditions. Tried to matter if it was clear, cloudy, raining, windy. Camera 12 always glitched at 2:37. Then one night in March, the shimmer changed. Instead of the usual warping ripple, the sky behind the trees bulged, like something invisible pushed out from behind the feed, distorting the image. Only for a second, but it was enough to make me lean closer. I thought maybe the camera had finally cracked or water got inside the lens. I paused the live feed and zoomed in. There was a shape, barely visible, like a smear of light bending around something solid, right in the middle of that bulge. I couldn't describe it exactly. It wasn't round, but not angular either. It had no clear edges. Just this suggestion of presence, right where the shimmer always happened. The moment I let go of the zoom button, the feed cut out entirely. Camera 12 went black. I rebooted the system, but it didn't come back until 2:41. When it did, the view was normal again. The next night, the camera worked fine. At 2:37, the shimmer returned, back to the usual warping. The shape didn't show up again. Not for a while. About a week later, I brought a small set of binoculars from home. Nothing fancy. I figured if the distortion lined up with something in the real sky, maybe I'd catch it. Around 2:30, I stepped outside again and stood behind the east lot. Brought a laser pointer with me too. Not to do anything with, just to mark the spot for myself. At 2:37, I aimed the binoculars at the same patch of sky and waited. That's when I noticed the silence. No wind. No crickets. No distant truck hum from the highway. Just absolute stillness. Then the pressure came again, stronger this time. My vision through the binoculars wobbled for a second, like I was looking through thick glass. I felt lightheaded, dizzy, like I'd stood up too fast. Something flickered past the stars. I don't know how else to say it. A flash of not sky, just a split second of something darker, more textured. Then it was gone. I lowered the binoculars and just stood there. I didn't go back inside right away. After that, things started to feel different in the office. Not wrong exactly, just watched. Like there was something just outside the edges of the camera feeds, waiting for 2:37 to tick over. One night, I tried calling the security company's tech team to ask about replacing camera 12. I didn't say why, just that the feed kept glitching. The guy on the phone checked the logs and said he didn't see any errors. According to their system, the feed had been stable for months. I asked if the system ever skipped over timestamps. He said no. It wasn't designed that way. I hung up. A few nights later, something new happened. I was pouring coffee when I heard a click from the monitor bank. Not a glitch, an actual mechanical sound like someone pressed a button. I turned and saw camera 12 was no longer showing live footage. It had switched to playback mode 2:37 a.m. from earlier that night. Only this time, there was footage. No shimmer, no glitch, just a frozen frame of the trees and something in the sky above them. That same vague shape I'd seen before. Clearer now. Almost translucent, like a jellyfish but without tentacles. Hovering, motionless, high above the tree line. It didn't move. It just hung there. Then the screen flicked back to live view on its own. I didn't touch anything. That was the last time I saw anything that clear. After that, the shimmer kept happening, but the shape never came back. At least not on camera. One night, near the end of March, I went outside one last time around 2:35. I stood in the same spot behind the fence and looked up at the same patch of sky. At 2:37, I felt the pressure again. And this time, I heard something. Not a hum, not a voice. Just this faint clicking like stone tapping on metal. It came from above, steady and slow. 5 clicks, then silence. I backed away and went inside. I didn't go out there again after that. The shimmer still showed up on camera 12, same time, same spot, every night. I stopped watching it, started turning the monitor off just before 2:37. I didn't quit the job or move away or anything like that, but I stopped asking questions. It never glitched on any other camera. Never happened during the day. Only there. Only then. Only that sky. We were about an hour outside of Laramie, Wyoming, heading south on Route 287. It was late, just past midnight, cold and clear, mid-November. My wife Carly was asleep in the passenger seat, and our daughter June was dozing in her car seat behind me. The only other noise was our dog, Hopper, shifting occasionally in the back cargo area, letting out these soft, half-sigh, half-growl sounds like he does when he's dreaming. We were coming back from Carly's sister's place in Bozeman. It took longer than we planned getting out of there, so instead of splitting the drive over 2 days like usual, we just decided to push through. I didn't mind the night drive. Roads were empty, just a few trucks every 20 minutes. I was maybe 15 minutes north of the Colorado border when it started. The stretch of highway there is straight, real straight, for miles. You can see the road cutting through the hills way ahead of you. No towns, no lights, just fences, open fields, and those bare little butts in the distance. I remember checking the clock, 12:12. I remember that specifically because right after I glanced at the time, I saw something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a person, just off the shoulder, standing still, facing the road. That's not all that unusual. There's ranches scattered all over that area, and sometimes you'll see people out checking fence lines, even at night. But this one didn't move, didn't have a flashlight or reflectors, just stood there. I slowed a little, maybe from 65 to 50, not sure why. Instinct, maybe. My brights were already on, but the figure didn't light up like you'd expect. You know how someone will glow a little in headlights, even just their skin or shoes or something reflective? This didn't. It stayed in shadow until we were maybe 100 yards away, and then it was gone. Not like it ducked or moved, just wasn't there anymore. 1 second it was standing maybe 2 feet from the white line, and then the headlights passed over that exact spot and there was nothing. Empty grass and dirt and fence. I remember leaning forward, squinting, trying to catch anything. Maybe it had stepped back or dropped down, but there was no motion. Carly stirred a little, but didn't wake up. I kept driving. Another 5 minutes went by. I'd almost convinced myself it was a fence post or a weird shadow. Then I saw it again, same side of the road, maybe another mile up, standing in the same way, still facing the road. Only this time, something about it looked off. It was tall, taller than before, or maybe just closer. But the head seemed too small, the shoulders too narrow. I don't know how else to put it. It looked like someone tried to draw a person from memory, but got the proportions wrong. Again, I slowed, this time to maybe 40. And again, just before we got close enough for the brights to really hit it, it was gone. Just gone. One frame it was there, the next, it wasn't. I felt this pressure in my chest. Not panic exactly, but something tight. I checked the mirror. Nothing behind us. I tapped the brakes a few times just to hear the sound. Carly shifted and murmured something like, "We home?" And I said, "Not yet." She went back to sleep. Hopper let out a low whine then, and I glanced back. He was sitting up now, facing the rear window, ears forward. He doesn't usually do that unless there's an animal nearby. About 2 miles later, I saw the figure again. This time on the opposite side. Left shoulder, maybe 20 feet off the road in a shallow ditch. Same posture, same stillness, but this time I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes on the road and passed it. I tried not to look, but I caught a flash of it out the driver's side window as we passed. Just enough to see that the limbs looked too long, like the arms hung lower than they should, and the legs seemed to bend the wrong way at the knee. That's when Hopper started barking. Loud, frantic barks, nothing like his usual huffing. June woke up and started crying, and Carly jolted awake, looking around, confused. I told her everything was fine, even though my hands were white-knuckling the wheel. I didn't want to stop, not even to calm the dog or settle the baby. I just kept driving. The next 20 minutes were quiet. No more figures, no cars, nothing but the low hum of the engine and Carly trying to get June back to sleep. We crossed into Colorado around 12:45. There's a little green sign that marks it, and that's when I let myself breathe a little. But 2 miles past that sign, just outside a bend near Owl Creek, there it was again. Dead center in the road. It didn't move. Just stood there. Same height. Same wrong proportions, right in our lane. I swerved left, hard, tires screaming, went halfway into the oncoming lane, thank God there was no one coming, and missed it by inches. Or maybe there was nothing to miss. because as soon as the headlights hit where it should have been, there was just pavement, nothing else. Carly screamed. Hopper lost it again. June was sobbing now. I pulled over a few hundred yards later, breathing hard, hands shaking. Carly was yelling, "What the hell was that? Did you fall asleep?" And I just kept saying, "I saw something. I saw it." We sat there for a long time, engine running, hazard lights on. I didn't want to look in the rearview mirror. Hopper stayed rigid, tail down, growling at the back window. Eventually, Carly took the wheel. I rode passenger the rest of the way to Fort Collins. We didn't talk much. I drove that stretch of 287 again a few months later during the day. Nothing unusual about it. No weird landmarks. No ditches or trees where someone could hide. Just a long, empty road through the hills. Same as always. But I haven't driven it at night since. We were staying at my sister's place in northeastern Oklahoma, just outside Stillwell. She's got this ranch-style house with a big backyard that rolls into pasture, and beyond that, a stretch of tree-covered hills. Real quiet out there. You can actually see stars at night, which is rare for me since I live closer to Tulsa. It was me, my wife, and our daughter Sophie, who's 6. We stayed for a long weekend. It was the first night there when we all sat out in the yard after dinner. My brother-in-law had built a fire pit, and the kids ran around while the adults passed a bottle of wine. The sky was clear, one of those late summer nights where it stays warm even after dark, and the stars come out early. I remember pointing out Orion to Sophie. She loves anything space-related. She had a little notebook with her and kept asking me to spell names so she could write them down. Betelgeuse, Sirius, Rigel, that kind of thing. We watched a couple satellites go by. One might have been the ISS. No weirdness, nothing strange, just a nice night. We went to bed around 11. Sophie slept in the guest room next to ours. She was tired but wound up, probably from the marshmallows. I got up once during the night to pee, around 2:30 or so. I remember because the hallway clock chimed right after I flushed. I peeked in on her, and she was out cold. Next morning, we were all in the kitchen eating pancakes when Sophie came in with her notebook. She said, "I drew the sky from last night." She flipped to a page, and it was mostly what you'd expect. Stars, constellations, a big crescent moon off to one side. But the weird part was right in the middle of the page. This big dark oval with no stars inside it. She'd drawn stars all around it, but left that one part blank, like something had blocked them out. I asked her what it was. She said, "That's where the stars went away." I said, "You mean clouds?" She shook her head. No, it wasn't a cloud. It didn't move. My wife kind of laughed and said, "Kids and their imaginations," but something about the way Sophie drew it bugged me. It wasn't scribbled. It was neat, deliberate. She'd even shaded the oval lightly, like she was trying to show that something was there, not just blank space. Later that afternoon, while everyone else was napping or watching TV, I went back outside to where we'd sat the night before. I stood in the same spot and looked up, trying to picture the sky from memory. I couldn't remember anything weird. No missing stars, no weird shapes. But I also realized I hadn't really looked at the sky long enough to notice if something had been off. I'd been too busy talking and passing the wine around. I brought it up again that evening. Asked my brother-in-law if he remembered seeing anything strange in the sky. "Nope," he said. Clear as a bell. Stars were out full force. Why? I told him about Sophie's drawing. He laughed it off. Probably just watched a spooky cartoon. That night, we sat out again, just me and my wife. She fell asleep in one of the lawn chairs with a blanket. I stayed up and watched the sky more carefully this time. I don't know what I was expecting. There were stars, some satellites, nothing unusual. Then I noticed something subtle. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, just a faint sense that one part of the sky was off. It wasn't darker or lighter exactly, but when I looked directly at it, the stars were there. When I looked away, out of the corner of my eye, that patch seemed blank, like the stars flickered or faded slightly whenever I didn't focus straight on them. It was maybe 10 degrees wide, high up in the western sky. Again, not black, not lit, just a patch that felt wrong. I blinked a few times and even rubbed my eyes. Nothing changed. I figured it was fatigue or maybe some weird eye trick, but it lined up roughly with where Sophie had drawn that oval. At some point, I heard the cows out back making noise. Just a few of them, not the whole herd. Not panicked, but restless. I stood and walked to the fence. The field was mostly dark, just a couple distant floodlights. Couldn't see much, but I thought I heard a low humming sound. Not from the cows, it was too steady, almost like the deep tone of a fridge motor, except it didn't come from the house. It felt ambient, not loud, but I could feel it in my chest. I looked back up at the sky and that patch was just gone. Stars were normal again, or maybe they'd always been. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. The sound faded too. All of it lasted maybe a minute, 2 tops. I went back inside and didn't say anything. Next morning, Sophie showed me another drawing. Same thing, stars and moon, but the oval was smaller and lower this time. I asked if she'd seen it again. She nodded and said, "It moved." I said, "What moved?" "The thing with no stars. It was over the barn this time." That's when it clicked. The western sky above the barn, same spot I'd noticed the weird patch the night before. That day I asked my wife if Sophie had ever drawn anything like that before. She said no. She usually draws animals or planets, not sky scenes. I asked if she might have been watching something on TV that gave her the idea. My wife said Sophie had only watched one movie on the trip, and it was Frozen. On our last night there, I went out alone. It was warmer that evening, a little hazy, and I couldn't see as many stars. I sat on the same chair and watched the same patch of sky. I don't know how long, maybe an hour. About halfway through, I noticed the barn's floodlight flickered, just a quick pulse. Then the cows started again, more restless this time, like they were crowding each other. I stood up and took a few steps toward the barn. Couldn't see much, just some movement near the fence line. Then everything got quiet. No cows, no bugs, no breeze, just a stillness that felt too sudden. That hum came back, louder this time, but still low, like standing next to a big transformer. It felt like it came from above and below at the same time. I looked up again. There were stars everywhere, except for one patch that looked flat. Not black, not cloudy, just an absence. Same spot, same shape. I tried to take a picture with my phone, but the screen just showed a blurry dark mess. I gave up and just stood there watching nothing. After maybe 30 seconds, the patch kind of softened. The stars around it seemed to fill in gradually, not all at once. The hum faded. The cows settled. I went inside and didn't sleep much. We drove home the next morning. Sophie didn't draw anything else. I still have her notebook. Every now and then I flip to those pages. The stars, the moon, the oval. It's always in the same place, just a little different each night, like it was moving, or watching, or both. I was driving back from my sister's place in Dighton, cutting through the back roads like I always do to avoid the tolls. It was close to 1 a.m., early March. Cold, but not snowing. I remember that specifically because there was a weird mist hugging the fields. Not quite fog, just a low-lying haze. The kind that doesn't really affect visibility but makes the world look off, somehow quieter than it should be. I was about halfway between Westport and Tiverton, middle of nowhere. Just 2-lane asphalt, no lights, trees on both sides like walls. I had the heater on low and the radio tuned to some oldie station out of Providence. It was playing Baby Come Back or something like that. I wasn't really listening, just kind of zoning out. Then the song cut off mid-chorus. Not a fade, just gone. Silence for maybe 3 seconds, and then this sound started up. It wasn't static, not quite. It was more like a rush of air layered with whispers. Not clear, not words I could understand. It was like 10 people whispering at once in another room with the door shut. Nothing about it felt like a normal signal. I thought maybe I'd drifted out of range of the station, but when I hit the seek button, it just bounced between identical versions of the same sound. Every frequency, FM, AM, didn't matter. All of it was that same hiss-whisper mix. I figured something was wrong with the radio. I shut it off, then back on. Still the same. Unplugged my phone to try Bluetooth. Nothing. It wouldn't connect. The screen on the dash just froze like it was stuck loading. I pulled over about a mile later, more out of frustration than anything. No shoulder, just a patch of grass where a dirt path split off into the woods. I killed the engine and sat there, listening. Everything outside was dead quiet. No crickets, no wind, not even the usual ticking from the engine cooling down. The radio was still on, That same static whispering coming from the speakers. Lower now, but still there. I stepped out of the car to see if maybe there was interference from something nearby. I don't even know what I thought I was going to find. The second I closed the door, it hit me how cold it was. Not freezing, but colder than it should have been for March. And the mist was thicker there. It clung to my clothes the way ocean air does, but there was no salt, no smell at all. I stood by the driver's side and looked around. No lights in either direction, no houses, no movement. I tried my phone, no signal, not even the emergency SOS icon. That part bothered me more than the radio. I'd driven that road plenty of times. There was always at least one bar. I got back in the car and kept going. Slowly. The mist wasn't letting up, and I was starting to feel this pressure in my ears, like when you're driving up a mountain. It wasn't painful, just enough to notice. I cracked the window to equalize it, but nothing changed. I made it another 5 or 6 miles before I started seeing those weird light reflections, the kind that flash off your windshield from nowhere. Except they weren't coming from behind me. They were in front, flickering just past the trees. Not headlights, more like glints, random and fast, like someone waving a mirror around. I slowed down, but didn't stop. I didn't want to stop. The radio got louder, all on its own. I hadn't touched the dial. The whispers were clearer now, but still not words. I swear I heard a voice say something like "turn," just once, and then it went back to the noise. I checked the volume. It was at 5, same as before, but it sounded like 20. I reached over to shut it off completely, but the screen stayed lit. Frozen again. Just the station number, 91.1, and that noise, louder than ever. That's when I saw someone standing on the side of the road. Not walking, not flagging me down, just standing still a few feet from the white line. I hit the brakes hard. My lights hit them. It was a guy in a hoodie, hood up, jeans soaked to the knees. He wasn't facing me. He was turned toward the woods, arms down at his sides. Not moving. I stopped about 30 yards back. Didn't get out, didn't honk. Just sat there with the car idling and the noise blasting from the speakers. I looked down to kill the radio again, and when I looked back up, he was gone. Not walked away. Gone. The spot where he'd been was empty. No movement in the trees. No sound. Nothing. I backed up, slowly at first, then faster. I didn't want to pass that spot. No real reason, just instinct. I turned around in someone's gravel driveway about a quarter-mile back and headed the way I came. The mist started thinning out after a few minutes. The pressure in my ears eased up. About a mile later, the radio suddenly switched stations like it had just unfrozen. Started playing commercials for a used car lot. My phone buzzed with a backlog of notifications. Everything came back to life like nothing had happened. I pulled off at a 24-hour gas station on Route 6, sat in the lot for maybe 20 minutes with the engine running. Didn't go inside, just sat there. The radio worked fine. Bluetooth worked. Phone had full bars. I've driven that road since. Once during the day, once again late at night, just to check. Nothing strange either time. No mist, no guy on the roadside. Radio stayed normal. I don't drive it anymore though. Even during the day, it feels off, like I'm not supposed to be there. We were heading back from fishing out near Lake Meredith, me, Tessa, and my cousin Wyatt. It was late, somewhere past 11, and we'd taken the old service road instead of the highway, which was probably stupid, but we were in Wyatt's truck, and he liked cutting through that stretch for the view, even though it's just brush, dirt, and wind turbines. We didn't see another car for miles, just dry, flat land and those tall white turbines spinning slow in the dark. The sky was clear, no moon, but you could see every star. It was one of those weirdly warm spring nights, like it should have been cold, but the air felt heavy and still. No wind at all. We were maybe 15 minutes from getting back to town when we saw the car. It was a gray sedan, parked half in the road and half on the shoulder, maybe 30 yards ahead. Headlights were on. Driver's door hanging wide open. Engine running, we could hear it as we got closer, Zard, this soft, uneven hum that didn't sound right. Wyatt slowed down and we just sort of stared at it. No one inside, no movement. He pulled over a few feet back from it and left his truck running. None of us got out at first. We were just quiet. Then Tessa said, "That's weird," and I remember her voice sounded flat. Not scared exactly, just off. I got out first, walked up slow, hands in my hoodie pocket. I think part of me expected someone to pop out, maybe a guy peeing in the bushes or someone changing a flat, but there weren't any bushes, and the tires were fine. I leaned in and looked around the interior. Purse on the passenger seat, phone in the cup holder, keys still in the ignition. The headlights were shining out into the field beside the road, and that's when I saw it. Right where the beams hit, maybe 30 feet ahead, was a perfect circle of scorched grass. Not trampled, not burned like from a fire, just blackened. Charred all the way through, but nothing around it was touched. Just this flat, round patch about the size of a backyard pool, maybe 15 feet across. Wyatt came up behind me and said, "That ain't a campfire." And he was right. There was no debris, no tire tracks near it, no sign of anything burning its way in or out. And the weirdest part, the grass wasn't flattened. It was still standing up, just dead, black and brittle like it had been cooked straight through. Tessa stayed in the truck. She rolled the window down and asked if we should call it in. I said, yeah, maybe. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the car and the patch in the same frame. But when I opened the gallery to check, it was just black. Like the lens cap had been on, even though it obviously wasn't. I tried again. Same thing, just pure black squares. Not blurry, not overexposed, just nothing. I didn't say anything right then. I just stuck the phone back in my pocket. Wyatt circled the sedan, looking for signs of damage. There weren't any. The rear passenger door had a small smear of mud on it, like someone brushed past in a hurry. That was it. The grass along the edge of the field hadn't been stepped on either. No trail, no prints. He popped his head into the driver's side and looked around. "It's in park," he said. "Full tank. Windows down in the back, no wallet." I asked if it could have been stolen and ditched. He just gave me a look like, stolen and ditched in the middle of nowhere with the lights on and the keys still in it? Didn't add up. We stood there for a bit, not saying much, just listening. The air felt wrong, like it was too quiet. No bugs, no wind, just that low hum of the engine and the turbines turning way off in the distance. Then something buzzed, Wyatt's phone. He checked it and frowned. "No service," he said, and held it up like that'd change anything. I looked at mine. Same. No bars, which didn't make sense because we were close enough to the wind farm that there were usually 3 towers in range. I'd streamed YouTube in that area before. Wyatt said we should drive into town and report it. Let the sheriff's office handle it. I agreed. But then he turned to get back in the truck and froze. What the hell? I looked. Tessa was gone. Passenger door still shut, window still down. Her seat was empty. I took off running, yelled her name. No answer. I ran around the side of the truck, half expecting her to be crouched behind it messing with us. But she wasn't there. Driver's side door still shut too. The grass on the shoulder undisturbed. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds since we saw her last. She couldn't have gotten far. There was nothing to hide behind anyway, just flat land and sky and that burnt circle out in the field. Wyatt shouted and took off toward it. I followed. We got to the edge and stopped. It was cold near the patch. Not like a breeze, just colder. The air dropped 10 degrees. You could feel it in your teeth. The soil crunched under our boots like it had been through a fire, but there was no ash. Nothing drifting or smoldering. Just dry blackness. We circled the edge. No tracks in or out. No sound except our breathing. Then we heard the truck horn. We spun around, headlights flashed. Tessa was back in the truck, sitting in the front seat, eyes wide. She looked pale. Wyatt sprinted back, calling her name. I was right behind him. When we got there, she was shaking. Said she didn't remember leaving the truck. 1 second she was watching us by the sedan. The next, she was sitting in the seat, alone. She swore she hadn't moved. But her boots were dusty like she'd been walking through the field, and there was a smudge of soot on the back of her jacket. We didn't ask more questions. We just left. We drove straight to the sheriff's office and reported the car, gave the location, told them it looked abandoned, left out the rest. Next morning, we called to follow up. The deputy said they'd found the vehicle, but nothing unusual. Just a stalled sedan, engine cold, no sign of the owner. Towed it to impound, no mention of the scorched grass, no report of the door being open. I asked if they found a purse or phone inside. They said no. Clean interior, Nothing of note. I checked my phone again later that day. The pictures I'd taken were gone. Not even black squares anymore. Just missing. Like they never existed. The only trace was a blank spot in my camera roll where the thumbnail skipped a few seconds. We didn't talk about it again after that. Not really. Tessa won't go near that part of the county anymore. Wyatt sold the truck a few months later, claimed it had electrical issues, but I never saw any. I still think about that car. The way the engine sounded like it was straining. The way the grass was just dead in a perfect circle. I don't have a word for what we saw. All I know is we weren't supposed to be there. I was flying a Cessna 182 back from Redding to Medford just before sunset. I'd done that route maybe 50 times, mostly ferrying parts or small packages for a shop my cousin runs. Nothing fancy. I'd taken off late because of a holdup with the cargo, and I remember being kind of annoyed about it since I didn't want to be landing in the dark. The weather was clear, a little hazy to the west, but smooth air and good visibility. It was just me up there. No co-pilot, no passengers. I had one crate about the size of a microwave strapped in the back. I checked everything twice before takeoff, like I always do. Radios, transponder, fuel altimeter, everything clean. I filed VFR and stayed around 7,500 feet once I leveled out. No issues, no chatter except a little traffic out of Sacramento way. I first noticed it just past Shasta. I was maybe 15 minutes north, somewhere over the forest between Dunsmuir and the state line. It started as a little glint in the corner of my right side window. Not bright, not blinking, just this pale yellow dot floating a few hundred feet off my wing. My first thought was that it was another plane, maybe someone coming in from the west at an angle, but I scanned and didn't see any nav lights. No strobes, no fuselage, nothing solid, just that one glow. I radioed a position check and asked if anyone had traffic at my 10 o'clock. Tower said negative. Nothing on radar. I tried not to dwell on it, but I kept glancing over and it was still there. Same distance, same speed, just tracking with me like it was pacing me. I turned 10 degrees east to see if it'd break off. Nothing. It adjusted too. Exact same angle, same relative distance. Not jerky like a drone, not fast like a jet, just smooth, like it was matching me perfectly. That went on for a solid 5 minutes. Then I did something kind of stupid. I banked hard to the left, a tight turn I wouldn't normally do unless I was trying to avoid something. Not dangerous, but sharp enough that I expected the thing to overshoot or fall back. It didn't. It matched me. It stayed locked in the same position relative to my wing, smooth as glass. I don't even know how to describe the movement. It wasn't aggressive or fast, but it was too precise, way too precise. Whatever it was, it had no trouble keeping up with me no matter what I did. By now, I'd started to sweat a little. I was gripping the yoke too tight and trying to keep my breathing steady. I keyed the mic again and asked Medford Tower if they had anything in my vicinity. I probably sounded a little rattled. They came back calm, said there was no known traffic, no radar blips, nothing visual reported. I didn't respond. I just stared out at the thing. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a basketball, but it gave off this really soft glow. Not like a spotlight or a flashlight, more like a lantern behind frosted glass. Pale yellow, maybe a hint of green. No sound, no flicker, and still no solid object around it. Just that light. I wanted to believe it was some kind of drone. Maybe a test unit, something high-end. But it didn't have the movement for that. Drones wobble or surge forward a bit when they adjust. This thing just glided, like it was floating on water. It stayed with me for another 10 miles. Then, just as I started to descend toward Medford, it drifted back behind the plane. I craned my neck trying to see it, but it was behind the wing and out of view. I expected it to either come up on the other side or disappear completely, but it didn't do either. It just wasn't there anymore. Gone. Like flipping a switch. I called Tower again and requested a visual confirmation on final. They gave me clearance, no mention of any anomalies. I landed clean, taxied over to the hangar, and shut everything down. By the time I got out, it was fully dark. No lights in the sky, no sound. I did a full walk around on the plane before leaving, just out of habit. Everything looked fine. No burns, no scratches, no weird heat anywhere. The crate in the back was still latched tight. The guy from the shop met me at the hangar, made some joke about my hair sticking up, asked if the wind had been that bad. I didn't laugh. Later that night, I checked the flight data and radio logs. My position reports were all there, but nothing on the tapes about unknown traffic or unusual visuals. I called the tower the next day and asked if they'd pulled anything from radar in that area around my flight path. They hadn't. Said the skies were clear, not even a weather balloon. I tried to let it go, told myself it had to be some kind of atmospheric effect, maybe sunlight bouncing off something, even though it tracked me well after sunset. Lacey, my wife, told me not to obsess. She's right, probably. But I can't stop thinking about how it mirrored every single movement. Like it wasn't just following me, it was watching. I was out behind the garage on the little rise that overlooks the pasture. Clear night, early October, not too cold yet. I'd been messing with the old telescope again, the Celestron my dad left me when he passed. I hadn't touched it much since high school, but lately I'd been taking it out when the skies were good. Just something to do to keep my hands busy. That night was perfect. No clouds, barely any wind. The moon was about 3/4 full, high and bright. I had the scope trained on it, just admiring the detail. The craters always surprise me, how sharp the shadows are even from this far. I had a beer sitting in the grass, and Milo, our dog, was lying nearby. He's a red heeler mix, usually gets jumpy around critters, but he was calm that night, just lying there, head on his paws. I'd been watching the southern limb of the moon for maybe 20 minutes when something passed in front of it. Just like that, a black shape, fast, no lights. It cut right through my view, maybe a second or two tops. I blinked and leaned back, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Could have been a bird, I thought, but I hadn't seen any wings, no flutter, just a solid, dark shape, gliding. I reset the scope and waited. Nothing else crossed. I checked the sky with my naked eyes. No clouds, no planes. The sky looked clean. But I kept thinking about how wide that thing had been in the eyepiece. It covered maybe 1/10 of the moon's face as it passed. That's not small, not unless it was real close. I tried to shake it off, but after that, I couldn't settle. I started scanning other parts of the sky, just out of habit, I guess. Around 11:30, I heard Milo growl. Not loud, just low in his throat. I looked over and he was standing now, ears up, facing the woods behind the fence line. I called his name, but he didn't look at me. He just stood there like he was trying to smell something that wasn't there. A minute later, I heard this weird popping sound, like static, but deeper. It wasn't loud, almost like it was happening inside my ears instead of around me. It came in little bursts, 4 or 5 in a row, then nothing. I turned off the red light on my headlamp to let my eyes adjust better. The woods were quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Usually you hear night bugs or the occasional coyote yip. That night there was nothing. Just Milo, dead still, and me with this uneasy feeling crawling up my neck. I started thinking about that shape again, the way it moved, smooth, no wobble, no noise. I've seen geese fly across the moon before. You can tell they're birds. The shape flutters, wings flap. This thing was more like a block, angular, kind of flat, and it didn't taper like a plane. A little after midnight, the pasture lit up faintly, not like floodlights or anything, more like the way snow reflects light from a distant town. Except there was no snow, and Oakview is the only town near us, and it's 12 miles off. No reason it would light up our field like that. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Enough to make Milo back up a few steps and whine. I turned in a full circle, trying to find the source, but it was just this dim, sourceless glow that faded as quick as it came. I packed up the scope after that. No real reason. I wasn't scared, not then, just done. The feeling you get when the woods go silent right before a storm rolls in, even when the sky says otherwise. We headed toward the house. Milo kept glancing behind us. I didn't look back. Inside, I poured another beer and stood at the kitchen window, looking out toward the rise. You couldn't see much past the tree line, but I watched anyway. At 1:14 a.m., every clock in the house reset. Not just blinked, full reset, like the power had been out. But nothing else had turned off. The fridge hummed steady. The porch light stayed on. I walked through each room, checking outlets and breakers. Nothing tripped, nothing off. Just the clocks, microwave, stove, coffee maker, wall clock in the den, all blinking 12. I stayed up until about 3. Never saw or heard anything else. The next day, I asked around. Our neighbor Anita said her motion lights kept triggering around 11:30, but she never saw anything out there. Said her cat wouldn't come out from under the bed until morning. Milo was weird for a few days after that. Didn't want to go outside at night, which is unlike him. He'd just stand at the door, staring out like something was still there. I took the scope out again the next week, but I haven't seen anything like that shape since. Just stars and satellites and the moon, same as usual. I don't know what passed between me and the moon that night. I just know it wasn't a bird and it wasn't a plane. And for a few hours after it did, the world felt off, like something was near that wasn't supposed to be. The power went out around 11:30 that night. I was already in bed, but the whole house suddenly went dark, like someone flipped a switch. No warning or flicker, just black. I checked my phone, no signal. Figured it was a local outage. The wind had picked up outside, trees were creaking, but no storm or rain. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and went downstairs to check the fuse box, thinking maybe a breaker tripped. Everything looked fine. I thought about going outside to see if my neighbors had power, but it was cold and quiet. My dog, Finley, a medium-sized terrier mix with a gray muzzle, was restless, pacing near the door. We stayed inside, windows shut tight. The weird part started when I went to check the security cameras. I have a system with 2 cameras on the back of the house, mostly to keep an eye on the yard and driveway. Usually, I check the footage from my phone app, but the app was offline because of the power and internet outage. When power came back around 1:15 a.m., I got back on my phone to check the cameras. The living room lights flickered on, the fridge hummed back to life, and my phone finally showed the camera feed. That's when I saw it. The video showed the yard starting at 11:30 p.m., the moment the power cut out. It was grainy, low-light black and white, but you could make out shapes. The wooden fence, the tall spruce tree near the corner, the patch of grass where Finley likes to dig. Then, about 20 seconds into the footage, a slow, smooth shape appeared from the right side of the frame. It hovered just above the treetops, gliding silently across the yard. It looked like some kind of craft, maybe a rounded, slightly elongated silhouette with soft edges, no sharp lines or visible wings. It didn't shine or flash any lights. It was just there, moving quietly and deliberately about 10 feet above the grass, drifting toward the left side of the frame. The thing moved too smoothly, like it was floating in water, and made no sound at all. Finley was on the porch, barking once or twice, but no other noises. What got me was how slow and deliberate it was, like it was surveying or searching. The footage showed it drifting for about 45 seconds before it vanished past the camera's edge. But then, right after that, the footage turned to static and glitching. The video became corrupted, skipping in and out, freezing on static lines, the image flickering like a broken TV signal. No matter what I tried, I couldn't recover or view any of the footage past that point. The file was damaged, unreadable. I went outside right away, flashlight in hand, hoping to find some sign the thing had actually been there. The yard looked normal. No footprints, no scorch marks, no broken branches. Finley circled a few times, but didn't dig or sniff anything unusual. I checked the rest of the house's electronics. Nothing was broken or acting weird aside from the power outage itself. The next morning, I asked a neighbor if they'd lost power too. They said yes, but they didn't notice anything strange outside. I didn't mention the footage. Over the next week, I kept watching the camera feed whenever I could. The cameras stayed online normally, but that night's footage was the only one that showed the weird shape. Sometimes I wondered if it was some kind of drone or a weather balloon, but nothing fit. No blinking lights or noise, no equipment, no explanation. A few nights later, the power went out again, same time, same pattern, but the camera didn't capture anything unusual, just the yard in darkness until the power came back. I started feeling on edge in my own backyard, like something was watching from the trees. Finley didn't like it either. He'd growl softly sometimes at the edges of the yard, staring into the dark. One night, I sat on the back porch late, watching the treetops. The air was cold and still. I thought I saw a faint glow far off, moving slowly behind the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. No flashes, no sounds, just a feeling that something was there, drifting somewhere out of sight. I don't know what it was or why the footage broke right after it appeared. The whole thing keeps me up sometimes, thinking about what else might have been caught or what might have been lost.